that starts here and continues up until just about the day of town meeting. And I want to thank you all in advance for the work that you folks do to get the town in the position to get ready for our annual town meeting in June, at which point the capital budget, the betterment budget, the operating budget, and all the miscellaneous departmental budgets are debated and approved at our annual town meeting. Thank you very much. I have two audiences here today. The audience number one is the people who are in the room, members of our finance department, members of the finance committee, members of the board of selectmen. The other audience is the audience that is watching at home. So I know you folks all have a budget book. The people who are watching at home do not have the benefit of having a budget book that's in front of you. So, so I am going to speak to both audiences, and I will leave questions. I will leave questions at the end for any questions before we start with Greg Morse, Tom Ford, and Chief Grasso, who are also present to speak about their departmental budgets. Ladies and gentlemen, in your budget books in front of you, I'm going to be speaking off of, first and foremost, the budget message under tab 1. This budget is presented to you in accordance with the requirements of Mass General Laws and the Town of Sturbridge's Charter. And I like to use this budget message as a way to kind of give a brief overview of kind of where we are as a municipality, both in our revenues and our expenditures. I'll try not to go into too great of a detail, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Before we get started, let me just start by saying that the budget that you have before you is balanced to the extent that the expenditures do not exceed the available fund projections. I commend the town departments, the finance committee, and the board of selectmen for their conservative approach in recent budgets. This proposed budget is $32,553,300, an increase of just over $1 million, or it's a 3.2% increase over last year. I have it broken down as to how the proposed budget sort of looks under general government, public safety, public works, health and human services, debt, education, equaling out to the entire $32.5 million budget for fiscal 19. I don't like to talk about expenditures without talking about revenues first. So, as you see on the next page, our property tax revenues reflect about 74% of our revenue stream. These numbers are consistent with what I've been presenting in the last 2 years, so there hasn't been any great changes. There's been marginal changes, but essentially 74% of all of our revenues that we collect come from the property taxes and the other miscellaneous taxes that we've collected. State aid represents about 14% of our operating budget, and local receipts represent about 12% of our operating budget. Speaking of state aid, and I'm going to talk about it in a little bit again, right now I can point out that this is being an election year. I'm cautiously optimistic that we will see a growth in our state aid numbers before the end of this process. The numbers that we're using right now are the governor's numbers. They're the only numbers that we have available to us at this moment. The House and Senate hasn't yet started their real hardcore budget deliberations, and I fully expect that there may be some movement, or at least I'm hopeful that there's going to be some movement on the state aid numbers. When we start this process, and when every municipality starts this process, we are usually starting this process without the benefit of knowing what the state budget aid numbers are going to look like. You may recall that this fiscal year, we are operating under a budget that was crafted after the beginning of the fiscal year. So every single town had already had their town meeting prior to the state aid numbers being completely finalized by the Commonwealth. The fiscal outlook for the town of Sturbridge is actually very good, and has been good for a number of years, but this year in particular, we've had some very positive movement here in the town. Our bond rating was once again reaffirmed by our bond rating agency of Standard & Poor's at AA positive. It is a very strong bond rating for the town. It's due principally to our conservative financial management policies and practices. You may recall 2 years ago, we took the steps of formalizing a lot of our and refining a lot of our fiscal management practices and policies. It also, Standard & Poor's Standard & Poor's detailed announcement to the town highlights our strong management team, consistent ability to maintain a balanced budget, and our very strong debt position. So these are things that, as your town administrator, I'm very proud of, but I think that all of you deserve to be as proud of that as I do. All of you play a very important role in the strong fiscal condition that the town finds itself in today. The reason why this is so important is that if we ever do need to borrow money, it allows us to borrow money at a much lower interest rate, which basically saves all the taxpayers' monies on all our borrowings. This does not include any refunding project, we recently went through a refunding project earlier this year. That's the reason why we had our reaffirmation by Standard & Poor's, because we were able to refund our borrowing that we did this year. We were able to save the taxpayers $400,000 in borrowing costs over the next several years. All of these things are very positive for the town of Sturbridge. However, we are seeing some budget stresses that we are locating in our budget. Some of these are not new. Health insurance, for example. The renewal of our health insurance for this year, for the upcoming year, is going to be 7.5% higher than our current year. That's the bad news. The worst news would have been had we not agreed to a 2-year guaranteed rate at 7.5 for the second year, we would have been over 10% or higher. So we were actually saving the town nearly $50,000 by making the agreement that we had last year. Why? Well, for a couple of reasons. Health insurance increases are not a secret, certainly not unique to the town of Sturbridge, and our claims data is reflecting that we should have had a much higher increase than our 7.5% increase that we have this year. We're very fortunate in the actions that we took to make sure that we protected the assets of the town. Pension costs, as you know, pension costs are also going up, hey, Bruce, we'll get you a seat right here, Bruce. And good morning, how are you? Yeah, why don't you sit up here? No problem at all. Nice to see you this morning. Our pension costs, we're seeing a 9% increase in our pension costs for fiscal 19. It's based on our actual costs, so as people retire and people live longer, our pension costs are going to increase as well. But probably the largest stressor on our operating budget this year, as it was last year, was in the category of education. We have almost $800,000 in new revenues over last year, and $630,000 is going to fund the required increases at Burgess and Tantascwa. Represents about almost 80% of our available funds, newly available funds this year, is going in the category of education. So it is something that we all collectively need to be mindful of. We have a very strong history of supporting our education here in the town of Sturbridge. I don't think anything is going to change in that in that area. However, it is something that we all have to be very cognizant of. These three categories alone represent nearly all of our new monies that we have available to us in this upcoming fiscal year. I highlight here in my budget message that strong budget principles help the town determine not only what we want, but equally important, what we can afford. As conditions change, the town must continue to be proactive in adjusting the budget or risk compromising our long-term fiscal health. That's been something that we've been very successful in doing over the last several decades. The town has developed several budgetary and fiscal principles to guide the administration, our finance committee, the town's departments, and the citizens in crafting and adopting a budget that continues to preserve the financial strength of the town. The policies currently adopted by the town administration are found in the town's comprehensive fiscal management practices and policies, and if any of you would like to have a copy of those, please feel free to ask. I'd be happy to share those with you. I think they are also found on our town's website. These policies are not everything, though. We review them periodically to find ways to improve them and to make sure that we don't slip and fall or trip along the way. Taken as a whole, the town's fiscal management policies represent the general philosophies upon all of our fiscal decisions and how they are made, including provisions for long-term financial planning, as well as guidelines for the use of free cash and stabilization fund reserves. Oftentimes, these things are also dictated by Mass General Law, so we are well-regulated and well-monitored. Like most municipal budgets, this budget has been developed with assumptions of available revenues. I always start to look at revenues before we start talking about expenditures. Thereby, we accept the limits of our town's financial resources. The budget is based upon established ceiling of revenue derived from local property taxes in accordance with the provisions of Mass General Law Proposition 2.5. Added to these revenues are things like state aid, special revenue funds, miscellaneous revenues such as fees and permits, earned interest, and use of free cash when necessary. The one exception to this process is exempt projects, whereby voters will determine that a particular project is worthy of an increase in taxation above and beyond what is allowed under the provisions of Proposition 2.5. We have two such projects. The Burgess Elementary School was done as a debt exclusion, and so was the Town Hall renovation projects, or part of that project was. This creates, a budget ceiling of how much we have. The available revenues is our budget ceiling. The expenditure floor, so to speak, is calculated by taking your fixed assets, your fixed and semi-fixed costs, such as debt payments, employee benefits, various assessments that we're required to pay no matter what, dedication of state education aid, for example. These costs are subtracted from the projected revenues, and basically it leaves us what we feel is the discretionary monies that we can be using to spend on things like maintenance and operational costs and those types of things. This year, due to the fiscal uncertainty that we've had in the state over the last couple of years, I instructed each department head to prepare a level service budget. A level service budget meaning that don't provide us with any new programs or services. Tell us what it is that you would need to operate at the same levels, doing the same things that you were doing this current fiscal year. I asked every department head on a separate submission to detail anything above and beyond that they would wish to have us consider. The finance director and I received budget requests from department managers starting in December. We began to prepare a draft budget in January and February, and we had conversations with department heads, as I mentioned, to make a claim for additional funding, or if things were not going to be sufficient with level funding, to have a sit down with us and to chat about what those needs are. I'll talk about the capital budget in a moment, but as you know, we do have a capital plan for the town of Sturbridge. We adopted such a plan several years ago. The Capital Planning Committee's report is under the tab in the back of the page, back of the book, along with the betterment report. I want to skip to the looking forward section. These are just a couple of the highlights of the things that might make this budget a little bit different than previous budgets. We are adding monies for the professional IT staff. I can tell you that when I first started working for the town of Sturbridge, one of the items that I received the most concern from the department heads here in the town and from the staff in general was our lack of IT support. We've been and continue to work with Tantascwa for IT services, but they've seen some changes in their staffing over the years that really has put a stress on their ability to help us at the levels that we feel that we need, but also our needs have increased as well. And the burden that we place upon Tantascwa during the school year when things are needed to be done here really puts them at a crossroads as well. Tantascwa and I have been talking about maybe transitioning to our own IT support. So this budget is going to include IT staff to kind of work in a transition period with Tantascwa so that we can bring on our own IT support. I would be delinquent not to mention fire department staffing. This past year, the Board of Selectmen authorized the fire department to apply for a SAFER grant to bring on 4 new firefighters. The town was fortunate to receive this grant, and we're in the process of hiring the staff on the provisions of this grant. However, you know that the way these grant processes work, they give you a lot in the first couple of years, and it transitions to lower amounts in subsequent years. So we do need to be mindful that the cost of the new officers at the fire department are going to have to be, that burden is going to be more and more on the town over the next couple of years. We did add some hours to the ambulance billing clerk this year. The number of hours for the position was insufficient last year, was called out as a future need of the department in my last year's budget message. This year, I was able to add those extra hours to the position to meet the needs. I also have added a few hours to the administrative assistant to the town planner this year. It was asked for in the past years as well, and this year I was able to add those extra hours. And we are continuing with the facilities department, which we started a year ago. I am looking at how that department is working. I had planned, until I had to go to the doctor's yesterday, I had planned to meet with department heads yesterday to talk about the facilities department, and I will be meeting with them next week as a way to kind of tweak the way that department looks and operates and is funded. I've been speaking for a good 20 minutes, so I'm going to bring us to a little bit of a conclusion before we start turning it over to Greg Morse from the DPW. I do want to summarize by saying that the fiscal 19 budget is proposed as written. It provides for the continual financial stability of the town and attempts to maintain essential services in spite of uncertain revenues. I would like to thank all the participants in the budget process here in Sturbridge for their work so far, beginning with the department managers and the boards and committees for their thoughtful submissions, and to the Board of Selectmen and to the Finance Committee for their advice and counsel, not only now, but in the days and months and weeks ahead. Finally, I'd like to thank Finance Director Barbara Barry for her efforts in preparing the final draft budget. I also want to thank Colleen, who is our new administrative assistant, who worked diligently to get these books to you folks in time for today's meeting. I am very proud of the team that we have in Sturbridge and very happy to be part of this team. If we could jump just quickly to the capital plan, I'm not going to go into great detail. I know that that's not the purpose of this meeting. This meeting is more to kind of give you more of an overview of how we are operating from a fiscal basis. We're going to talk about these a little bit more, but I think it's important that I give you and the people of the town a little bit of a highlight as to how the capital plan process is done every year. I think I've been neglectful in explaining how that has been done in years past. We have a capital committee in the town that's been established for several years now, and they are charged with reviewing all capital projects and items as an expenditure of $5,000 or more with a useful life of greater than 3 years that fall under categories such as acquisition of land, construction or renovation of a facility, which could be a building or streets or bridges or sidewalks, parking lots, those types of things. Acquisition of large capital items might be a vehicle, a fire truck or a dump truck, for example. Facility maintenance projects such as a roof repair or an HVAC system upgrade, those kinds of building maintenance issues. Or even planning, feasibility, engineering, or design studies related to a capital project. So if we were going to do a major rehab of say, a water or sewer plant, and we weren't planning to use those funds to do so, ratepayer funds to do so, that's how the capital planning process is done. We go by a number of factors. I'm not going to read them all, but there are 10 factors that are used to to determine which ones should be a priority and which ones should not. Everything from the public safety and health of our community all the way down to will it help us save money if we were able to do such a thing. It is a process that we're very proud of. I know it wasn't too long ago that the chair of the Finance Committee and I got to go to the Host Hotel and had a presentation where I explained to our capital planning process to the Association of Town Finance Committees across the Commonwealth, and we explained our finance, our capital plan to that astute organization. We talk a little bit about the funding, and I do give a list of all the items that are being listed under our fiscal 19 capital budget. I won't detail them all at length here today, but in essence, it really turns out to be about over $600,000 in funds in capital funds for this upcoming year. At this point, I will answer any brief questions that you may have, if you have anything specific at this moment, and if not, I will ask Greg to kind of move forward and take his seat in the hot seat. Does anyone have any questions for me before we move on to Greg?
Yes.
Yes, please.
You're giving us a relatively level-funded budget. It seems like we've got available revenues, so I'm not feeling a pressure to cut significant services from this budget. I'm just looking for, and we're kind of focused on, this is this year, let's get through it and move on from here. But what about the future in terms
Sure.
of your anticipated revenue streams? Are you seeing or anticipating things in the next year, 2 years, 3 years down the road that will bring pressure where we might have to start planning ahead and maybe not necessarily add something in this year that we might have to cut in 3 years? Or are you seeing the opportunity for maybe additional revenue that makes things a little bit more comfortable in the coming years?
Well, you asked a lot of questions. I could probably speak about it for about an hour, but I choose not to do that.
I just want the 2-minute version.
What I would say is, we actually have one of our tabs is the five-year forecast of the town. Barbara spends an awful lot of time pulling that together, and she does a great job of kind of looking at revenues, not only several years into the past, but also several years into the future. And if you look at it on a line chart, if you were going to look at it that way, you'll see that for the most part, things are relatively flat. Yeah, there are things that kind of spike higher than others. For example, I would argue that things like education and health insurance, for example, those are individual line items that don't necessarily follow a kind of straight and narrow path from one year to the next. But as of right now, the things that we need to be cognizant of are those things that I mentioned earlier that will be putting fiscal pressure on future budgets. Certainly education, if we're not careful, seeing, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollar increases on an annual basis in education every year is going to start putting pressure on other town departments if we're not careful. So there are things that we need to be cognizant of. I mentioned health insurance. I think that we have, the Insurance Advisory Committee and I, they've done a great job over the time that I've been here, and I'm sure that they've done a great job even prior to my arrival. But I'm assuming that in the next couple of years, we're going to start having to look at dramatic changes in the way that we do our health insurance. We're going to probably need to be looking at deductible plans, whereas, you know, we've been fortunate not to have to look at those kinds of high employee cost or presumed high employee cost plans. But we're going to have to start looking at those kinds of things. We've kind of done what we can for things like copays and those types of things. The things that would be left for us in insurance would be things like establishing a high deductible plans, those types of efforts. But yeah, I don't think that we're adding anything in this year's budget that we're going to have to cut in a few years. I don't know if you folks were able to watch the conversation that the members of the Board of Selectmen and I had with Chief Grasso when the SAFER grant was established, but the Board of Selectmen and Chief Grasso and I had a lengthy conversation as to what does that mean for those new officers when we are absorbing now 100% of the cost. Do we keep those people on, or do we use those positions to replace people that we anticipate will be retiring in the next 3, 4, 5, 6 years? So these are big decisions that we will have to think about in the next, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. I would argue that our fiscal responsibility over the last, I would say, couple of decades has put us in a much better position than where we are. Speaking of revenues, do I anticipate massive amounts of growth here in the town of Sturbridge? I don't. There could be some marginal increases in our hotel, motel, tourist destination, hospitality business. But at some point, we're going to see a maximum, we're going to see a capping of those kinds of things. So I don't anticipate that we're going to be seeing a dramatic increase in our revenues. I certainly don't anticipate that we're going to see a dramatic increase in things like local aid. The one area where I am hopeful that we will start to see an increase is in Greg's Chapter 90 aid. I've long advocated, when I was a member of the MMA Board of Directors, but even today, I'm a strong advocate that we could use an extra $100 million in the statewide Chapter 90 funds. And Chapter 90, for those of you who don't know, are the monies that we get back as a percentage of our fuel taxes that come to fund things like road repair, sidewalks, culverts, those types of things that help us with our infrastructure. We've been at the same level of Chapter 90 funds on a statewide level for a decade. Greg, haven't we always been, we've been at 200 million for 10 years, maybe longer. And as you know, the cost to put in a mile of road is astronomically more expensive than it was 10, 15 years or so ago. There are some towns that that really struggle. They would have to put 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years of Chapter 90 funds together just to be able to do one road, because the cost of doing these projects is so astronomical. If I was to tell you the one area where I have the biggest concern, and this is not a Sturbridge issue, this is a global issue, this is a national issue, is in the area of infrastructure. I think that we are sitting on a collective time bomb. Our water lines, our sewer lines, our roads, our bridges, our sidewalks, our infrastructure is the one area that I'm really negative about. And I think we were talking earlier this morning about, I'm usually a very positive person. Glass is usually half filled at all times. In the area of infrastructure, I'm less confident, because I think that the funding mechanisms for some of these is not where it should be and not what it could be. And I think that we're going to start to see more problems. And I'm not talking about Sturbridge here, I'm talking about everywhere. I am mostly concerned about those issues. Any other questions I may answer before we turn it over to specific department heads? Greg?
Did I go first?
Speaking of infrastructure.
So. Well, our budget is, it's fairly close to what it has been over the last few years. There's, there are a few things that are still out in the open, like paving costs and oil prices, things like that. But for the last few years, they've been fairly stable, even went down a little bit. So hopefully if they, holds true to where we are the last couple of years, we should be fine. The first salary issue is there's still money in there for hires, new hires, and I have interviewed quite a few people, probably 6, and I'm getting very close to 3 of them, so that's kind of ongoing. Overtime, we have seen more, certainly the weather's changing a little bit. We have seen more call-outs for branches and trees down, things like that. There's also seems to be more burials at the cemetery on Saturdays, so that account needs to go up a little bit. Longevity, there was one employee I had accounted for he's actually a DPW employee, he works at the landfill, so that number taken out. Snow and ice overtime, up a hair. And down to engineering. Engineering is really, it's under DPW, but it could be used by the town administrator or the planner or highway. Pretty much everybody's had access to it. It's fairly stable. The only thing we may have to do at some point with engineering is look at getting a different supplier for engineering services, because the one we've been dealing with is just sold out recently. Advertising's pretty much the same. Drug testing, we're in a pool. You could get one employee tested for the year, or you could get everybody tested for the year twice. So it's an account that we just try to get a little bit in there to cover the majority of it, but it could fluctuate either high or low. Electricity, we have 0, and I'm a little concerned about that. Historically, when the town enters into these, you have a generator and a supply, or a supplier and a deliverer type of deal. We've had this before, and one set of billing comes in and gets processed. The other set of billing wouldn't necessarily come through at the same time, and it's very hard to, during the course of a year, it's very hard to keep track of, where you are actually in that year. So when we enter these agreements, I think we got to put a little more emphasis on, look, we've used so many kilowatt hours for paying for it, and then supplying it for the delivery part. We need more teeth in our contracts with that, because it gets screwed up, and it's been screwed up before. We're going into another, session with more solar issues, and that's That's very hard to track where you are during the course of the year. It's-
Maybe it would be helpful if I can point out that there is, one of the changes that we've done in this year's operating budget, if you folks will go to the budget handbook, it's called the FinCom Handbook tab. I think it's the second to last page. It is the second to last page. You'll see that one of the things that we did this past year is we've taken and we've put electricity under central purchasing. So we're not zeroing out electricity. It might be zeroed out in individual line items, in individual departments, where we had previously had been identifying those. But if you look under the second to last page of that section, you'll see that electricity is now under central purchasing. It had been zero in fiscal 17 and 18 because we've been budgeting them within the departments. But moving forward, we're budgeting $100,000 for this year, and that's incorporating, so we haven't reduced the electricity budget, we're just putting it in a different category. It's gonna help Chris and I, dealing with our solar projects and all the credits that are coming in, be able to track them in one place as opposed to tracking them in a dozen places.
No, I get it, but what I'm saying, if the communication from, while you're tracking it, we need to track it too. Water and sewer, you're getting
No doubt.
10 bills a month, and if we're not getting, not only the expense of just paying for it, but the delivery charge, or the credit, or whatever, we need that. That's just as important to where we stand as, for you guys. So that's what I'm worried about, is just communication between how this is gonna be conveyed from central purchasing back to individual departments. And, it's a concern, because there's a lot of money on, water, sewer, highway.
So Chris, maybe this
Substantial
year,
amount of money.
you and I can sit with the department heads who have electricity, and we can talk this through. Thank you for mentioning that, Greg.
While we're on that topic, if I can, I had noticed that also, when you came up with the $100,000 figure that you then put into central purchasing, was there some analysis done to how that's going to be broken up from department to department, because you zeroed it out on the departments? Like, how are you allocating that $100,000 per department? Is it as they need it?
No, so it's not going to be the department's responsibility anymore. It's going to be handled through the finance department because of the net metering credits. What's happening is there are months where we don't get our net metering credits. And so what happens is we have spikes in the electric bills. So where we lowered our budgets for electricity by department, if we do not get the credits for a month or 2 months, which is what is happening, we're having basically budgets that are going out of whack because we have to wait 1, 2, 3 months. And so, we're new to this net metering credit receipt, but, we're being told by our energy consultant that we should be getting these credits monthly. The reality is we're not. And so I think the reason, I wanted to put this all in one account is because then when we don't get the credits, we eventually get them and they catch up. But when you have a small department, it puts the budgets out of whack, and it makes the departments think that they don't have enough money, because in that month they don't, because, it's just not working well. So we will still monitor it internally as to how much is being spent for electricity by each building, but the department heads will no longer be responsible for processing those bills, but it'll be available. It's no different than all the other central purchasing accounts that we have. We're still monitoring postage usage and gasoline usage. We still do that internally. So, those mechanisms will still be in place.
Thank you.
And this is a good problem to have, because we're actually getting money back from our solar projects. The Board of Selectmen, we've waited long enough for these monies, receipts to be starting to flow in. They are starting to flow in. One of the things that I'm hopeful to do sometime this spring is to have a report to the Board of Selectmen and to the Finance Committee as to how we're doing on our receipts, a few months into the into the process so that you folks could have a good understanding as to how good of a benefit this has been for the town of Sturbridge. Yes, it has been a benefit for this town.
What I will add, though, is that there'll be 4 categories of electricity. Water will still have electricity in it because that's a special revenue fund. Sewer will still have electricity in that account because it has to, because we have to account for it separately. The school department will still have their electricity in their budget, and then we'll have the central purchasing for all other town buildings.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Was that your question, Mike?
Yeah, you just answered my question. In particular, water, sewer, and education was my question, is whether they would have separate accounts, which they do, so.
So for those other departments, you made a good argument for why you'd want it in the central group there and finance department, seeing all these accounts, making sure it's flowing right. Are you still going to have them administer and pay process those bills for those other departments so that you know you're getting the credits in a timely fashion, can follow up, and just allocating them to a different expenditure account, or you're not administering all of the electrical accounts?
We're still responsible for allocating the net metering credits. So the town accountant that's one of his responsibilities. So he gets the information from National Grid, and then he allocates it accordingly. The school department, the school committee is the one that authorizes expenditures of the school budget, so that has to still be done that way. We haven't fully vetted with Greg as far as the water and sewer. My feeling is I'd like to just have Chris process all of the electricity accounts on the town side of the house, and then just provide reports back to the departments so that they can still monitor how much they're spending for electricity. So that's my goal as to how I'd like to see it done.
So just a clarification, so National Grid is still the supplier that delivers the electricity, and they have a supplier charge, so we'll still receive a bill that'll show meter by meter what's being delivered.
We do.
to each
We get a bill,
location.
yeah,
So that's a simple way to allocate it.
Right, and that's what we're doing now. Yep.
All I'm saying is, if we don't see it, if I don't see it,
No, you'll see
we don't know
it.
where
You'll be
we are.
seeing it.
And we've had a couple other things that get sidetracked, and there's a lot of electric bills to process, and I'm concerned about it, that's all I'm saying. Oil is, heating oil. Trash removal, it should be 6,000 instead of 600 bucks.
Yes.
Stringent.
It actually, we're going to change that figure to 5,000 because Greg was able to get a lower rate. So, yeah, it was a slip of a zero. Sorry about that, but it should be 5.
Yeah, back in like 2017, we were notified that we were gonna, our trash was gonna go up to almost $900 a month. It was $880-something, $889 or something like that. And we said, look, we're not interested. We're gonna start shopping around. We're not interested in paying that much money. And we finally did some negotiation and got down to, if we did like a single stream recycling and then a trash, they would split the number of times they come to empty the dumpsters, and it actually cut it back down to a fairly reasonable. It actually went lower than what we were paying for originally. So we do have a double dumpster. We have one for straight trash and one that's recyclable. The only thing that I'm not sure about is the volatility of recyclables. There, in the last 4 or 5 months, we've gone from like having positive, sending out materials and getting a positive, cover your trucking and get a little bit extra money on the way back on the materials, and now we've seen rates of not covering trucking, and certainly some of them are even starting to pay for the disposal. So since China has pretty much stopped taking a lot of them, or they've put an increased cleanliness on them, 10% is, fairly easy to establish, or 90% clean is fairly easy. 95 is getting pretty tough. And then now they want something 97% or better without any contaminants in it, and that's almost not doable under the, current types of things we have today, so I think that's an area where the town, that's kind of an unknown for the next year or two to see what, until somebody develops a better recycling program in this country, or there's more money for funding. It's kind of a shaky area for the next year or so. Our security is, it's the same outfit. They've been pretty stable over the years. They don't require a whole heck of a lot, but we don't have a lot of, it's also fire. Protection's under the same thing. It's the same service. Machinery maintenance, purchase of services, it's, everything's getting so specialized nowadays that, you know, you need outside help. And it's, the only way to combat that would be to have a, you know, get a computer system. It'd probably cost you 50 to 75 grand. I don't know what exactly the cost would be, but then you'd have to update it every year for, because our issue is we have international trucks, we have Volvo, John Deere, and Case for equipment operators, and to get something to cover all of them, it would cost you some serious money, and then every year you'd have a program update, and it's just not worth, you know, you need the outside help. You just can't go it alone for a town. It doesn't make any sense. Other repairs and maintenance, uniforms, charter services, we were notified that they are going up. That's our internet. Fire extinguishers, we're on a rotational system. They come and you know, test them, put a new tag on them. That's done every year, just because there's so many in all the buildings. We have water, sewer, highway. There's several. Every vehicle's got them, so small ones. So it's just an ongoing program. Dam inspections are out for this year, and ice and snow is up a little bit. Office supplies are stable. Building supplies, stable. Machinery maintenance is going up. We're seeing a lot more engine-related, computer-related, engine-related issues, and with very low mileage. I mean, we had a truck with a EGR cooler that had like 40,000 miles. We had another one with like 26,000 miles. So it's a fairly catastrophic failure, but it's not due to age. I mean, it's inherent, you know, more inherent to the type of design and meeting emission standards that is creating the issue. Grease oil, engine oil, and hydraulic oil, that's kind of split. We get bulk oil for engine work, and the school picks up one and we pick up one, so that's kind of been split back and forth. Uniforms, lawnmower supplies, cemetery. Cemetery also helps with lawnmowers, but it also does paving or crack sealing or some other, any repair, wall repair, anything like that. The auger was a one-time thing. The filing cabinet is for the office. The line striper, that was a capital submittal, and it got put under the budget. We have a line striper. It's a it's a compressor type. It's a portable unit with a compressor, and it's kind of, it was there when I got there, so it's 23, 25 years old or something. I mean, we still use it, but it's not. It's worn, I guess it's worn out, would be the best thing. So this is actually, doesn't have a compressor on it. This is a pump. You just fill the hopper, and it pumps directly to the nozzle, and it's a lot easier to clean. You know, it's a lot easier. It doesn't clog as much. you don't have to worry about high pressures. So it's more in tune with, it's a lot safer unit, a lot easier unit to run, and like I said, the other one's pretty old. Snow and ice is going up, evidently, which is fine, because we do end up deficit spending pretty much every year unless we have a real, minimal year.
We're increasing snow and ice because what we've been trying to do since I've been here is it's been stable for many, many, many years. I try to increase it at least a percentage of the cost of living adjustment that's being granted to the union employees, because otherwise we're just artificially making our deficit higher. This year we've also increased it a little bit on the supplies and services side as well, because we know the costs are going up. We still have a deficit, to deal with, but, we don't want to make it artificially larger than what it could be or should be.
Hydraulic license is pretty much the same thing. Not everybody's hydraulic license is due at the same point. It's all birthday related and when you got them, so that kind of, and the other reality is we're getting more and more licenses. More people are getting, instead of having a single license for a loader or a backhoe, now it's split out. We have to have one, the person in the boom mower, roadside mower has to have a different license than somebody with a forklift license, that somebody with, so all the state regulation is really starting to, that's ultimately a line item that will end up going up. The more regulation that comes, the more it's going to go up. But it isn't, not every department member has to do it every given year, so it is a split on people's birthdays and when their license is due and things like that. Dues and membership is what it is. And then the only other one is the private road maintenance is fairly stable.
Craig, how many employees are you down right now? Is it,
3.
it's still 3?
Yep. I did some interviews, and what happened was, you always get a lot of people that don't fit, it's licensed is preferred, which is, but you get a lot of people that don't have any licenses, and then one will have one, but not the other one. And this year we did, in February and March, we have gotten some better applicants and suitable applicants. So I'm pretty happy about that, and that's something that I want to sit down with Leon quickly here and get these guys online and let him do his interview.
We anticipate filling those vacancies in the next month or so.
Yeah,
Some of them.
easily, yeah. Yep.
Is the reduction in salaries and wages of approximately $40,000 due to retirements and hiring new staff at a lower rate?
Well, that was, that kind of went back to one of the employees. When I did the salaries, I had another employee, because the one at the landfill, I always list them underneath our stuff, essentially because he's under our contract, number one, but essentially for his longevity and his uniforms and his licensing and things like that. So that's probably a physical error, on my side, but even though he's paid under the Board of Health, I add him underneath ours, just to make sure that he was accounted for, but that's part of it.
Okay, so it's an adjustment for the landfill?
Yeah.
Okay.
So he came out and went on the Board of Health, which he would be anyway, but,
Yeah.
Joni?
Hey, Greg. So I see you have some capital requests for your dump truck and another truck. So
I thought we, did you not get some sort of dump truck, or am I thinking of a tractor in the truck?
No, we got one, we ordered it, and it's, that one hasn't come in yet, but we're gonna need another one.
So this is two, this is the second one? This will be number two?
This would be number 2, yeah.
And it's a net new.
It's what?
It's a net new, you only had the one.
We had one from last fiscal year, which has been ordered, was ordered last year, and we still don't have it. So, yeah. Evidently, there's a real slow, the truck, the cabin chassis part of the truck comes, I mean, that thing's been around for 6 months, and getting the body put on it and getting it delivered to us is the other.
So you anticipate that, I guess.
The salesman was in the other day, and for about the 4th time said, "It's coming soon." But did he give me a date? The answer is no.
It's in the mail.
So I would suspect we'll get it before July. I would say July, but,
Because technically it's off the books, right? I mean, it's paid for, right? I'm assuming.
well, we haven't paid for it. No, you don't pay for it until they deliver it.
Right, okay, so delivery, so I'm just trying to get a feel for when it would be seen. So we're asking, so if that's gonna be, those funds would be allocated anyway for it when it comes in this fiscal year. And so the funds that we allocate for the next dump truck, seems like it takes a year to get these trucks.
Yeah.
It takes a while.
It does, yeah. It didn't even take that long to get to the ladder truck, I don't think.
It was already built.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when we get if we buy a fire truck or anything,
Oh, so this is a separate, the one you're purchasing in the capital this year is new. I thought the one last year was a used one, no?
No.
And then the only other question is on roads. So I know every year finance committee asks for the road survey and information. Do you have something like that that you'd be able to provide?
We do something different now. We actually have, we underwent, you may remember, a pavement management system process that we started with CMRPC last year, or is it the year before? Maybe it's 2 years now. We've been undertaking that effort, where they actually have a scientific approach to this. So we actually have been continuing to work with CMRPC. Greg, would they be able to provide to us like a fiscal 19 update as to where we are based upon what roads you're planning on doing
Yeah, well,
this year?
they just sent us a map,
Yeah.
and but we didn't get a report per se, but they sent us the map from the year before.
Yeah.
We adjusted it for what work we did,
Right.
and they re-rated it. But did they send a report on that? No. I'm sure they could,
We
but,
can request one of those. It's a much better process than the process that was done when we were essentially doing it ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just curious, and really, at the end of every winter time, you get these big potholes that appear, right? And I know that there are some roads in town that have far worse than others. I was just curious to know what that schedule would be like. It just seems some, and I don't know how it happens that.
People were complaining on
you know, you might
Facebook
have
about
a particular
I like
road
148.
scheduled for
It was fine.
something else.
Bridge is a little bit, yeah.
So that one.
Pizza in front of my house as well.
No kidding.
Farquhar is a mess.
Oh, it does.
Especially the bridge. Oh, yeah.
certainly does.
Because there are some roads in town that have been in need of
Yeah.
repairs for a while.
Yeah, the bridge.
And then last,
But our rating is actually pretty good when you look at it compared to a lot of communities, I gotta tell you. It's not bad. Could be worse.
I haven't talked to Ty, so I'm sure. But my only other last question is, how are we doing on the bridge for Champlain?
Waiting.
The money was supposedly, voted on, appropriated, but it hasn't been released yet, so. So the $1.4 million bridge job will probably be two when any available funds come through, but at least it would take the lion's share off of it, and we could proceed. We try to keep a little bit in reserve for Chapter 90 because we do a lot of work in-house, and we do save, quite a bit of money on one end to get
Because
get
Holland
a
Road's
decent
probably
rating on the other end, but
before Farquhar. I don't know. It's been a
you
while
still need
since I
that,
looked at
the lion's share of that 1.4. And
Well, it's the GPS.
we could,
Yeah, but they
you can
don't
look at
read
any
it.
other bridge. You could pick
When I didn't see
Farquhar
the
Road, you know. You could pick Holland Road, and, you know, we did $250,000 worth of work on Holland and Stein Hill, but, you know, you could do more, and,
But is the
but
1.4 million still coming to us?
it's allotted, but
Yeah.
Not released.
it has to get sent.
The monies was appropriated to the town, can we say 5 years ago, maybe longer?
At least, yeah.
As part of a capital bond bill issued by the Commonwealth. And it requires the administration to agree to release those funds for the project. So, you know, the legislature put it in, the governor has not, struck
Wasn't it when
the appropriation.
Patrick was-
However, the appropriation, we are still waiting for, we are still waiting for the state to deem it to be ready to be released.
And when you say administration, who's that? The governor?
Yes. It's actually, at this point, it's in the hands of the governor.
I got a question on the decrease in your budget in reallocating the landfill. First, why isn't there an increase in the landfill budget?
I don't do the landfill budget. I just want to account for the guy because he's under our contract, but,
I didn't see the $40,000 difference in the landfill budget, if that was correct.
well, they probably had him in there anyway, is what I'm saying.
No, the bulk of the decrease you see for the salaries and wages, is that what you're looking at, that line?
Yeah.
Is because Greg had a lot of turnover this year, so some of his employees that left had been here a while, and they were at the higher end of the pay scale, and they're being replaced with people that are at the lower end, and so that's what accounts for most of it, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Craig mentioned the increase in internet services, and I think a lot of people have been seeing increases, especially with the current nationwide debate on net neutrality. Could you summarize the current state of agreements with internet service providers and any plans or opportunities to address those in the future?
I don't know that I can.
So we are in the process of moving to fiber for, so this building, the library and the center office building, we just switched over to fiber. The plan is, it will probably not be next year because we have a lot of other IT projects that are kind of a higher priority, infrastructure-wise, especially at the public safety complex, that are ongoing. But the goal is to bring the other town buildings also under fiber. One of the things that we have, and that is through charter, one of the issues that we've had is, like, as far as like our financial software, we're on the cloud. So if we have a blip with when we were on regular internet, we would be down. So now that switchover just happened. It's probably been a month, maybe a month and a half. So, that will obviously be a nice thing that we won't have those issues anymore. But the same thing would happen at the library, that CW Mars would go down and they'd be handwriting when people needed to check out books. So that's where we're headed. I don't know if that's 100% of your question, but.
I was more getting at utility to the
To the whole
public.
town?
Yeah.
Oh, like the contract.
You're talking about the cable contract?
Yeah.
Well, I can give you a long story about that. So let's go into our time machines back to the early 1980s, all right? And when and this will be important for the Board of Selectmen when we have our discussion with our friends at Charter. Back in the early 80s, when cable became a thing, there was a lot of concern at the cable provider level that that municipalities were going to authorize a company to come in and dig in the front of everybody's yards and then dig along the roads and put in all the infrastructure, and that in a few years, the cable company was going to be thrown out and a new cable company was going to be brought in. state laws were established to kind of give the cable providers a little bit more of a protection to prevent that from happening, because it was a gigantic investment of funds at the beginning stages of cable to put in the infrastructure, the backbone, in order for cable to operate. So in a municipality such as this, we would have a contract that we do. It used to be 10-year contracts, and now I believe most of them tend to be in the 5-year range. I think our current contract is for a 5-year contract. I think it was signed right around the time that I started. I think Suzanne
signed it.
Sean was here when that was all going forward.
Yeah. Sean was gone, yeah.
So, so there is a cable renewal process that the town must undergo with our cable provider. Is it impossible to change providers? No. Is it extraordinarily difficult? Yes. It is extraordinarily difficult. There is a giant hill that you have to climb in order to change a provider. Sometimes you were able to see when Verizon was doing their Fios program, that you could find another non-cable provider where you would still have your own cable provider, but you would have another provider that would do something completely different. However, the last time I spoke to Verizon about that, they put a hold on their Fios expansion program, and they were only looking at doing it where they were in the area of what they call a hub. So whatever was easiest for them to get into the market was how they were entering into the market. Aside from that, it is extraordinarily difficult to change a provider. There are, the law is established and the regulations are established to make it difficult on purpose. That wasn't the answer you wanted to hear, I'm sorry. But I want to also say, and this is just my looking into a crystal ball, I do see the end of cable coming. I mean, clearly I see the end of cable coming. When I can go on my cell phone, I can watch Netflix and Hulu and HBO and Showtime and Amazon Prime, CBS. I can watch all of those things and shoot it onto my home television. The technology is not, the cable industry is a 1980s, 1990s technology that eventually will be no longer viable in the, in the workplace or in. So, at some point, I see that on the horizon. I'm sure the people at Charter don't want me to be saying those things out loud, but I kind of have felt that way for a long time. I have more power in my cell phone than I do by the old coaxial cable that runs into my house. So.
I have seen news of towns in other states building their own infrastructure at incredible cost, but in order to bid out the service. But I don't think it's a possibility in Massachusetts.
There are states there are communities in Massachusetts where that actually happens. But those are usually towns where they have their own municipal light plant.
Yeah.
So, for example, the town of Shrewsbury has a municipal light plant. There's only 46 or 47 in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, cities and towns that have their own municipal light plant. And when you have your own municipal light plant, it makes it easy for you to do that. So Shrewsbury has the Shrewsbury Cable Company. I don't know what it's called, but that's what it is. And they are able to provide cable services as a provider to the entire municipality. Doing it outside of having your own municipal light plant is extraordinarily difficult, because now you have to bring on a ton more employees. The little truck that has the little bucket truck that goes up and down, there's a lot of things that you need to bring on that you wouldn't ordinarily have. And then you also have to have the infrastructure in the ground, your own infrastructure in the ground, and there's not an easy way for you to do that. It's not a cheap way for you to do that. So is it impossible? No, but I think we are, the bigger hurdle would be trying to get a municipal light plant. And if I remember correctly, I don't believe there's been a new municipal light plant established in Massachusetts in probably 40 years. So take that. for what you will.
Thank you.
Yeah. All set?
Thank you, Greg.
Now, these totals have to be changed?
Yes. Oh, yes, we're going to
And
give
that-
an update
right.
on that document.
Yeah.
Chief Grosso, I think, no, I'm sorry, Chief Ford is next.
I don't have the agenda.
Yeah, I don't either.
There was a schedule, yeah. Did it not get there?
No.
Oh, all right.
get it either.
Well, at 9:30 will be Tom Ford, and at 10 o'clock will be Chief Grosso, and at 10:30 will be Bree Eistad, who is our new health agent. And then at 10:45, it will be me and Barbara for any closing questions or comments that you folks may have. I'm sorry, I thought I already sent it. And we're only 20 minutes behind, so Chief, you have 10 minutes. to
Quick.
get us back.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Morning, Tom.
Good morning.
Morning, Chief.
Good morning.
Yeah, oh, please.
Good morning to everyone.
Morning.
Thank you all for assembling this morning so that we could have an opportunity to answer any questions about our proposed budget for fiscal 19. Everyone has, or should have, a copy of our police department budget, and unfortunately,
Can I just interrupt you? I don't
Yes.
think they have a copy of your manpower
I
proposal.
was just going to mention that. I was
No.
just, I was advised this morning that I overlooked submitting this document. I figured you'd have it all memorized by now, so.
I was wondering.
It just might have been a mental oversight, not including it with the budget. However, it was done right at budget time, and it, with some modifications to it, is my annual manpower proposal. And so, in speaking with Barbara Berry, everyone will get a copy of this sent out to them, so you have it to review, and I believe we have a meeting with the Finance Committee in April, so I can certainly answer any questions and discuss that in April with the members of the Finance Committee. As the Chief of Police, I've submitted, this is my 12th budget season, and each year, with the exception of 1 year, I've asked for manpower increases within the police department. Those manpower increases were to make up for increased responsibilities, losses of positions or positions that were absorbed by other administrative positions. And we have not had any manpower increases with the exception of the addition of an SRO, which does not serve our patrol force or our daily operations at all with respect to patrol and general duties since 2001. And each year I've come before the town, before the committees, before the boards, requesting manpower increases. In the manpower increases, it's not just for patrol officers and a detective. It's also for an increase to personnel in our dispatch center as well. As most of you are aware, we went into discussions about regional dispatch this year, and we went pretty deep into those discussions, and when final decisions were made before implementation, the town chose not to go forward with regionalization of the dispatch center. And as you can see from this proposal, and I do have copies from my originals, we have shortages in our dispatch center. Our dispatch center handles all police calls, all fire calls, and most importantly, our emergency medical services calls. So we support both the police and fire departments. Oftentimes, that dispatch center is manned by only one person, and that one person is responsible for answering calls for all those entities. The National Fire Protection Administration, that is a standard for most fire departments in Massachusetts, the standards that the Sturbridge Fire Department adhere to, has a recommendation as well as a law that went into effect in Massachusetts in 2012 that states that any emergency medical dispatch centers that handle ambulance calls are required to have any of their dispatchers trained in EMD training, which is Emergency Management Dispatch Training, and all of our dispatchers are trained to that level. What the NFPA states in their standard 1221 is that any department that's running a dispatch center that is providing EMD services, that it requires to have 2 dispatchers on duty at all times. Now, we've worked our best through state 911 grants over the years to try to keep part-time dispatchers in spots to fill in as second dispatchers. We've been successful with that to some extent, but there's a lot of shifts that go with only one dispatcher on at a time. Now, we did have the addition of a full-time dispatcher back in fiscal 16, which helped out, but in true honesty, it solved a fiscal 06 and 07 issue that I brought up about manpower shortages with dispatch. So 10 years later, we got taken care of, we got that dispatcher that we looked for. But now the problem, is still there, and it's expanding as the technology and the required training that these dispatchers have continues to expand. And where we're not going regional, the burden of providing those services falls back onto the town, and it's something that we expressed during all of our discussions about it. So I don't see this as anything new. The part-time dispatchers that we've had, I believe the number that I provided in my manpower proposal states that since 2002, we've trained 18 part-time dispatchers. Currently, we only retain 5 of those, at an average cost of $1,500 a year for initial training, then maintenance training on top of that for them. So it's certainly not cost-effective to keep having that manpower turnover with part-time personnel, or to even rely on running such a sensitive operation with people that aren't there full-time, that aren't committed to that as their full-time jobs. So, I will provide you with a copy of this. I will continue to state to the town that, we have waited, we've asked, we need personnel. I don't think that, I don't know that there's a magic number on years that the department has to wait. I don't know if it's going to require a crisis to occur first. I really think that, some of the effects of our turnover, some of the stresses that are on the men and women of the Sturbridge Police Department are born out of the amount of work that each individual officer has to complete, because they're doing multiple jobs, multiple tasks, that you don't find traditionally in other local police departments in our area. So I will continue to be the person that comes before you annually and requests these number of personnel to try to make our department more efficient, try to continue with the standards that the town has become accustomed to, that it requires of us. People in Sturbridge are very proud of the services that they have, not only the quality of services, but the quantity of services that are provided from all the departments every day. There's a reason that people seek to come here, and in keeping with that, we need to grow, and the police department needs to grow with it. We're going to continue to see turnover, I think, in the police department. If the stresses from inside, from the amount of duties that they have, and I don't think it's fair to not be able to provide the other peripheral services out there that we should be providing for the additional neighborhood patrols. When you have 2 patrol officers on, or 3 patrol officers on, and one gets tied up with a sexual assault investigation, now that officer's off the road essentially for 3 or 4 days worth of investigation. So you got one person that's just sitting that's just patrolling it and going from call to call to call. So if your neighborhood's got a bad street that they're speeding on, then we may not be able to get up to it right away, or I'll have to hire somebody at overtime to address it. The same thing with any of the other general patrols. But I would really like to open up this discussion further in the future, before the end of this budget cycle, to just bring people in to see the complexity of what goes on each day in the police department, the number of services that are being provided. And it's beyond just responding to alarms and pulling people over for speeding, as some might think. So that is my manpower proposal request, and I hope that is entertained this year. And I have not submitted any numbers. I've only submitted numbers for level service as instructed by by the town administrator. So therefore, before you, you have our level service funded budget with some increases, some decreases, and I would be happy to answer any questions on that level service budget and offer any explanations into any capital or betterment, as well as any questions about any of the increases or decreases that you may have seen or identified in the budget.
Priscilla?
Chief, back to your personnel, how many people would you be looking for to the ideal?
For the ideal personnel to include the dispatchers?
Sure. Can you break it down, though? Like, what you actually are looking for?
I can, yes, I can do that. I originally asked for 3 additional full-time police officers and 1 full-time detective. And with the necessity to have dispatch center run with 2 full-time dispatchers on it 24/7, we would need to add 3 full-time dispatchers.
Thank you, Chief.
And if you can't get ideal, but had to say the first critical step in that list, what would it be?
The highest priority?
Yep.
Would be the dispatch.
Dispatchers.
You know, while I firmly believe that that one doesn't outweigh the other, and if I didn't have the dispatch responsibility, I'd only sitting here and asking you, I would, if I was to get an opportunity to get a police officer, I would like to fill the detective's position.
Yeah.
The investigations that occur as a result of general calls for service are the most time-consuming and require the most paperwork and the most time for officers to have to go through interviews, to make telephone calls, the most time away from the general patrol duties that takes them away, the individual officers. So it would be a detective position and an additional patrol officer's position. I've never been one to come before the committees here to say that, we do have a very large overtime budget. But it's justifiable for what we have for operations, but I've never been one to say, well, if we hire 2 more police officers, the overtime budget's gonna go down. There's really there's no secret. I mean, it's just, the work's gotten, our work, in policing, and this is my 32nd year in Sturbridge here as a police officer, and I've never seen it as difficult as it has been through all the years to be a police officer, not only with the technology, with the type of crimes, with the amount of transparency necessary to the communities, the amount of discovery for the courts, the innumerable amount of mandates that the state has put upon us through the courts, through all other activities to provide all this information and provide additional levels of service. It's really taken the police department to a higher level, and I've never seen it as difficult as it has been now for policing in any community, but I'm focused right now, especially here in Sturbridge.
Chief, a question and then an observation. I'm wondering how much elasticity there is in staffing in light of seasonality, especially the summer with Sturbridge Village and summer camp people. There are more people, but there are not more sworn officers and dispatchers. So something has to give for 90, 120 days a year, seasonality also of the foliage. So there's got to be increased jeopardy for a third or more of the year, or do I misunderstand? And then an observation.
Well, when I first started here, the summertime used to be crazy, and there were 2 times a year that used to be busy. It was the summer and just before Columbus Day, that part of the fall. We used to be really, really busy in Sturbridge here, and we had a lot of part-time officers that filled a lot of those external responsibilities, the extra details, the extra functions that were going on in the community. But as time has gone on, that standard of service has just morphed into the entire year. There's really a very small window of time where our levels fluctuate between higher activity and lower activity. I don't see our activities, but we're not like a Cape Cod town where, you know, we have this influx of tripling our population in the summertime. We just see a steady flow constantly. Sturbridge Village has functions going on, you know, 12 months out of the year. So, you know, anything that was drawing just summertime activities, outside, you know, all of our lakes in town, which used to bring people in just in the summertime, have turned into full-time homes. And so I really don't see us having increased calls for service in the summertime or increased calls in the fall. You know, you go down Route 20, you know all the restaurants in town, people are coming through town constantly. And I don't think anybody, just through your own experiences going through town, I don't think you notice the difference in traffic on Route 20 unless there's a special event going on Monday in February as opposed to Monday in July. So I don't think that there's any changes with that. I think it's just a constant
Thank you.
high level of service.
Thank you. And then the observation, once in a while, I find myself waiting in the public safety lobby, and I just observe the dispatcher or dispatchers, and there are times when they almost look like octopuses. And it occurred to me with that, there's no forgiveness on accuracy. You can't be sort of correct. And what's at stake? So if there's an assault underway and the dispatcher who's got 2 phones ringing and somebody standing at the window and 3 other things, and accidentally says Old Farm instead of Old Town, what the hell could happen? Somebody could wind up dead because the officer went to the wrong place unknowingly. So is that, well, it's just an observation that I believe fits in the context of your employment framework that you're discussing.
Well, certainly it's a testimony to the quality of dispatchers that we have and the quality of employees that we have over there that really do take their responsibilities and take their profession to a very high level. And we're very proud of that. However, you know, there is a point where we have to adhere to the standards that are put before us, and we also have to be aware of the fact that they're working at that high level, and that anything that works at that high level is going to break at some point. Something may happen, and you know, I don't want to speculate what would be the outcome if that happens, but you know, the potential's always there, and I think that having you know, a second ear or a second person there's a reason for it. You know, there's a reason why that standard was established, and I think it was as a support and a protective aspect, so that you don't have as many mistakes like that as would be because a person's overwhelmed.
Chief, you had indicated that ideally first the 3 full-time dispatchers, then the detective. Do you have an idea of what the salary cost would be?
No, I don't. I had traditionally prepared budget 1 and budget 2, but this year I didn't do budget 2. Budget 2 usually included the additional full-time personnel, and I did not do that this year. And as you get worn out. You really do. You know, you come and you ask, and you come and you ask, and you prepare these budgets. So, no, I have no real numbers for you, but it's something that I could have for you at the April meeting that we're going to have together, if you'd like.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
My guess would be that we're probably looking at, you know, when you count benefits and salaries, you're probably looking at 400,000 perhaps for all the positions, maybe a little bit more than that.
400,000 for all 3 requests for
Yes.
400,000?
Yeah, but if you could bring a ballpark number by each individual request, I don't know that we're ever in a position to
No,
do
this is just,
anything, or, you know, give you the full ask, but you know, it'd be nice to know what each individual piece is if we had to chip away at it.
Chief, would additional officers and detectives require more vehicles as well?
We got vehicles.
You know, I don't think so. Not right away, because we wouldn't, I don't think that we'd be using the equipment. I think that it would require, we'd probably be buying we would probably have our turnover rate at a shorter period. I think that we would reach that 100,000 plus mileage sooner, so we'd be turning vehicles over more. So the short answer is yes, it would, but I don't think it would require more cars to be in the fleet. It would require us to turn over and probably ask for more replacements each year. We're replacing 2 a year now. That may increase to 3. But that wouldn't be right away. We'd have to first run out the cruises that we have. But I think that if we have additional patrols on the road, it's certainly going to put up the mileage on the cars.
Chief, with regard to dispatch backup, will we still have Southbridge as our backup for dispatch in the FY19 period? And
You mean for the 911 call?
For 911
callovers?
calls, yeah.
Yes, the way that state 911 has what they have referred to as a turnover. If Sturbridge is overwhelmed with 911 calls that they can't answer, and if they go to a certain number of rings, it automatically goes to our backup facility, which is Southbridge. And then if Southbridge is overwhelmed, it'll go to Charlton, so that the 911 calls will not go unanswered. They will go to a public safety entity at some point. So, and as we are a backup for those communities as well.
Yeah. We were also talking about the cruises. I can see you're asking for 2 cruises, and I fully support, that's a very reasonable request. However, the way we account for it in operating capital, I don't think that the way we budget for it is consistent with our town charter, because capital is defined as capital in our charter. And I know several years ago, the town decided to create this operating capital account, but I personally don't believe that's consistent with the charter. I just wanted to say that. I would, if it was capital or operating capital, I would still, I think in general, everybody here, or most everybody would support the purchase of two cruisers.
The process for submitting the expenses for the cars remains the same.
Yep.
It's just that when I submit it to the town, it's just placed in a different spot.
Yeah.
Essentially. So we haven't changed our process of justifying.
Yeah.
And the expenses I have all outlined here,
yeah.
so I can provide them.
I respectfully disagree with the way it's presented in the budget. That's all. I think the charter would be clear that capital is capital, and there's no such thing as operating capital.
Mike, I just have a question on that. What part of the charter are you referring to?
Where it defines what a capital item is.
In our charter?
Yeah. We have, in our
have
charter
to
and
read it again.
bylaws, it's defined.
I would say that I disagreed with you, Selectman, last year, and I disagree with you again this year. This is a common way for municipalities to put recurring capital in their operating budget. You'll note that it is voted separately. It is also discussed as part of the capital review process. We typically, though, build that into our operating budget as opposed to using capital funds or free cash in order to fund those. But if the board wishes to do it, have it presented in a different way, I'm open to having a conversation, but I think it's kind of a common way of doing that. I know in my last town, and that's not the only department where you could have a capital line. The UMass system, as established by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Department of Revenue, accounts for departmental capital. I don't think we're in violation of any of our town charters.
You touched on this. How many patrol hours are we losing per week doing detective-related activity?
Ooh, that's a great
How many
question.
hours a week does
That's
that
a great
take a
question.
patrol
It's something that
officer
I've never taken the opportunity to capture that sort of data. I don't. I can imagine the expression on the sergeant's or the lieutenant's face when I asked them to start documenting that kind of time, just because it's just another duty that they'd be responsible for. However, I think that I don't want to portray that it would be a scientifically accurate number, but it was something that I could certainly take a look at.
Maybe if you
We
could give
could,
us
you
when
know,
you come
we've
before the
got, we've got an
finance
idea of what kind of time it takes for each arrest where the officer's off the road in a station.
Sure.
If your house was to be broken into and you had stuff taken out, that officer's gonna be off the road for his full shift. And then each time that that officer comes back to duty, or if that's carried over to another shift, each one of those shifts, officers are taking the time that's gonna be necessary to make the calls. The one shift, obviously, that's not gonna be impacted adversely by this, it'd be the midnight shift, because they're not gonna be able to make phone calls, they're not gonna be able to knock on doors as frequently as they would be for day and evenings. But it's a data set that we really haven't taken the time to capture.
Well, maybe you could give us an estimate when you come before the
Okay.
Finance Committee. 'Cause I've personally been exposed to experiences where there were two, for instance, vehicle accidents simultaneously in town. And it's really tough for you to cover that when that happens.
It is, and it takes away from, you know, everything, something takes away from something that takes away from something, so.
Mike, I happen to have a copy of the town charter here. And I can read this to everyone. He meaning, I should mention that he is taken by statute to mean all persons. He shall present to the Board of Selectmen the annual budget of the town, and shall also be responsible for the development and annual updating of the capital improvement program. But I'd appreciate some guidance, and I say this along with Sturbridge, Selectman Chair. We sat together with others on the most recent Charter Review Committee. And I'd appreciate guidance, and I'm sure we all would, if you would please point in the charter to where there is a reference to operating capital. Here it is.
Well, it says operating budget and a capital plan, they're two separate
It doesn't
things.
say that. He shall present to the Board of Selectmen the annual budget of the town, and shall also be responsible for the development and annual updating of the capital improvement program. That's what it says. So maybe there's another place you could show?
In the town bylaws, it defines what a capital item is.
Well, one
And
thing
it's a
that
set-
we tried to make
I mean, in
clear is that the charter supersedes all
Everything else.
bylaws at all times. That
but I
is
don't,
not debatable.
It could be debated on another day.
yeah.
Well, yes,
Yeah,
it could. It was introduced, and we're making a record here for the public, and they're going
Yeah.
to be voting at the annual town meeting. We should have no confusion. Please
I-
provide the guidance.
Yeah, I object to having capital items buried in the operating budget. It just doesn't, it doesn't make the capital items that the town is purchasing transparent.
Well, I can
People should
understand
know.
the fish and fowl argument.
Yeah.
But I just think the public ought to understand that the charter is explicit, and there's just no such animal as a capital.
So these
operating
items are
budget.
shown, these capital items are shown in the capital plan.
I'm only
They're not.
saying, I'm only asking two things. One, please show me where there is in this charter a capital operating budget, and I don't think there is one, but I could overlook.
You just read that there has to be a capital plan. He has to submit a capital.
operating-
That's not a budget.
Capital improvement
Plan.
program.
It's not a
Okay.
budget.
Not a
Okay,
budget, that's separate.
okay. So when have these items been shown in our capital improvement program?
I don't know, and I'm not talking about that.
They're
I'm
not.
talking about what you're talking about.
Okay, they're not shown in our capital improvement program. They're not listed.
That's a separate discussion.
Yeah.
I just want to make it clear
It's not the
that
charter.
the budget is what it is and not at all what it is sometimes thought to be.
Right.
Okay, so I do think
But I can
we'll
answer the
have,
question.
we'll also have this discussion at one of our meetings too,
I will-
Larry, I'm sure.
Let me, can I have 30
Sure.
seconds? If
30.
you all look at the capital plan, tab. The very, very, very last page. This plan it details, it actually details the actual Sturbridge Capital Improvement Plan. It lists the department, the item, the expenditure, fiscal 17, 18, 19, 20. It's basically a 5-year capital plan for all departments moving forward. It lists every expenditure and item. It also has at the very end, at the last page, that we detail, as part of being as transparent as possible, that 2 cruisers are funded through the budget operating capital on an annual basis every single year. 1 year, every, 3 or 4 years? Chief, is it 3 or 4 years that you have to do 3 cruisers?
We
Oh, we haven't been doing,
No, we haven't been doing,
we did it through Betterment, if I remember correctly. Yeah, we've been doing okay. But typically, we do account for those in our operating plan as a recurring cost every single year, because that was the previously approved, before my arrival here as town administrator, a vehicle replacement program that was approved by the Board of Selectmen and I believe approved by the FinCom.
If I was wrong,
Maybe 80
Bruce,
seconds,
would have
I'm
gotten
sorry.
it.
That's okay. We take into account pneumonia.
I stand corrected. I didn't see it in there.
All right, well, thank you. I'm not trying to play gotcha, I'm just worried that the public know the truth of the matter, that's all. Nothing to do with you yourself at all. Even if Priscilla had said it, I would say. Who, by the way, I'm thinking about citizen's arrest on you, just so you know.
I have no fingerprints.
If we're all done with the chief, I think it would be great to have a 2-minute break. So
From more.
Oh, we're done?
Oh, actually, I had a couple questions.
Well,
I'm sorry,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
I don't feel like I've answered enough questions yet.
Well, that's because we
I'll
cut them
defer to
off.
Bruce first.
Bruce?
Chief, on the second page of your report, the line says, the town had an opportunity to regionalize dispatch operations and remedy the dispatchment and power deficiency, but chose not to. How would the deficiency be remedied? Is it that emergency management dispatch would only require a certain number of dispatchers to meet the minimum requirement by law?
Yes, to have the the Massachusetts law states that our dispatchers be trained as emergency medical dispatchers, which is a higher level of training, which we have. However, it's the National Fire Protection Administration, the NFPA, the standards for the fire services that provide the emergency medical services, that if we're providing that, it's a standard that they set that our fire department adheres to, that says that we should have, or shall have, 2 dispatchers on at all times if we're providing that emergency medical dispatch service to the EMS backup. So, to answer your question, we would need the 3 full-time dispatchers to have 2 people on at all times. That's for the full-time. And we would still need our part-time ranks because there's going to be some gaps there with vacation and holiday coverage to backfill some of those, but we would set a standard, a minimum manning standard of 2 that we would never fall below.
Thank you.
Kathy?
Yeah, with school security more in the forefront these days, have you seen an increase in your hours spent on discussions or activities at the schools? And has there been any further thought between you and Tantascwa, which I did ask at the budget meeting, of having a school resource officer at that level?
I don't think that the thought of school safety or safety in the community as a whole ever is not on the forefront and never does not get discussed. We have had safety drills at the schools, at all of the schools. We have a full-time school resource officer in Burgess. So we do spend an amount of time with the schools discussing safety, and we do have response plans in place that have been reviewed, but I don't, I believe it's been probably 3 years since I've approached the committee or board asking them to include a school resource officer up there. Their message was pretty clear about wanting a school resource officer at Tantascwa at either campus, the junior or senior high. And so I have not had any renewed interest in that's been brought to me, and while I'm not going to, and I have not been going before the committee trying to continue to push that forward, I hate to have to, review what's gone on in the world and be that responsive. I think that we've always had a very good plan in place, and I have a plan that I'm trying to work on now that's going to try to utilize a more whole community, if you will, approach with all the towns that are involved with Tantascwa, and to try to integrate a standardized approach to critical incidents in all of the schools, all the elementary schools in the Tantascwa district, and our high schools as well. So I would hope that the committee would be open to discussions about additional resources from the police departments at the school. I don't think that, I would definitely enjoy the opportunity to go up and to explain the position and to offer any insight that I could give to the school committee to stress the importance of having that resource available to them, especially at a school the size that we have there. I do have discussions with my peers in the area. The schools, the school system is, while we do communicate on a case-by-case basis, there's not regular discussion with the school. I don't get a phone call from a principal or from a superintendent saying, hey, if you're not doing anything, can we come up and talk about safety? While we've been to emergency management planning together in the past, we've looked at critical incident plans. I do go over to the elementary school probably more often than the high school to talk with the administration there and discuss safety plans there. I think that's because of our connection with the school resource officer that's over there, and then we review the plans over there frequently, and there's a constant interaction with them. So it's a discussion that's there. I believe it's a discussion that we could have further, though.
I would think so.
Oh, Kathy, the Board of Selectmen have plans to meet with the chief and school officials to discuss security. And I believe Tantascwa already voted their budget, didn't they?
Yes.
And they didn't have any money in there
No, I did ask
for-
that question. I mean, at that point, the budget was probably set really months ago, so. But, I happened to be up at the school on the walkout day last week and speaking to some of the students. It seemed that they were, pretty concerned about safety, and I got the sense that there was a large number who did participate in that walkout. So, there's certainly a concern at their level, but you don't really want to see, you don't really want to see
stress.
Kids having that sort of stress on an everyday basis. It's enough for the parents to have it, but the kids, that's a tough thing.
The school resource officer we have, I would assume they would have been assigned to the high school, but is it tied to the grant, or was it made that decision because
They
of
don't
the
want it.
education needs at the elementary school?
No,
The
Tantascwa voted against it.
didn't want the
That's what
officer in the school.
One time, I can speak for myself, I was on FinCom at the time, and there was some different members on that board, and they had an issue with a Sturbridge cop, quote unquote, okay? And this person said to me, I don't want a Sturbridge cop arresting my son. And I said, well, why would your son be arrested? I mean, that's question number one. And then he said, well, I don't want a Sturbridge cop touching students from my town. I said, I have a solution. There's 5 towns, color code T-shirts, so that if it's a certain color, the Sturbridge police don't touch it. And he said to me, that is the most ludicrous answer. I said, well, it's a response to your statement. So that's the mindset. It has evolved a little bit because that person's no longer there, but you have a small core that is adamant that there are no problems, everything is hunky-dory, we're all set.
Yeah, there's also been the question, and I've questioned it, and there's got to be some plan where all 5 towns pay. Sturbridge doesn't pick up the tab for but,
Even we agreed
But-
to do that, they didn't, still didn't want it.
oh, no, I know.
But according
Hey.
to the gun law of 2014, Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, but according to that gun law, if you have a regional school system, the town that the school sits in is responsible, the way I read that.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And that, the way, in a regional or a charter school in that town. And I personally, as one member of this board, I don't have a problem paying for it. If it's going to provide safety for all the children, I don't care where they come from, I'm going to provide that safety. That's my advocacy. It's safety of children, no matter where they are and where they're from.
Of course, doesn't our school sit in two towns? At least the
Not-
property does.
The
Majority
property
sits-
does,
just
yeah,
Property
Where
does.
does the building sit, though?
in Sturbridge.
That's all in
In
Sturbridge.
Sturbridge.
Yeah.
I don't care where the
Fiskdale.
field is.
No, the parking.
Wow.
Was the person that you had the discussion with not from Sturbridge?
You're right, not from Sturbridge. Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't. I mean, I'll admit, I was on the school committee when we voted against it, and I was against it at the time, but I think the world has changed quite a bit in 6 years, 7 years.
I'd be
since I've
happy
been
to
on.
come, I'd be happy to come
I'm
back
not on it
before the-
anymore,
before the,
Chief.
I'd be happy to come back before the committee
But
at any
the
time. I mean,
world
I've-
has truly changed.
I've never made,
in
I've
that
never made
time.
it a secret that I would be,
Yeah,
I
I
would be
know.
happy to go back there. It's just that there was never anybody
invitation.
knocking on the door or ringing my phone saying, come on up, we can't wait to talk to you about it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if no one on the school committee's brought it up there.
Oh, no, they have. They
I-
have.
I think they
They've been
have.
shot down.
Yeah,
They
but-
have, but they've been shot down.
Yeah, I mean, the committee vote.
It's been shot
Yeah.
down several times, but I don't think, Kathy, I don't think it's all that far away. I see movement, I'm hearing about movement. I'm not telling you this year,
won't
but
be this
there's a
year.
different, the mindsets are changing, and there's new blood, and that also helps, but the mindset is changing a little bit. At least there's now discussion.
And we're very fortunate that we've had Officer Daydall, our SRO that's at Burgess, that we've had her there for nearly 5 years now.
Teach the health
And
classes.
I couldn't ask for a
Direct
better testing facility or a better testing opportunity to be able to bring back the results of what she's done at Burgess, to bring back the principals, the assistant principals, and members of the administration at Burgess Elementary, to bring them bring their opinions with me to the school committee meeting, to let them know, what's gone on with the police officer that's worked in that school for these last 4 years, and the accomplishments that have been made, how she's integrated into the culture of that school system, the changes that she's made, the resources that she's provided, the outreach programs that she's been able to connect the school with, and just be truly an asset to that large Burgess Elementary community that we have over there. And I think that we're more fortunate to have that in play right now, to be able to take with us up to Tantascwa, so when we do get the opportunity to present the SRO proposal to them, that we have more data available for them to share.
Priscilla?
Kathy, to your statement too, I happen to know these two little boys, and they were telling me one day about this car that's hanging on their road that they don't recognize, and every time they walk home from the bus stop, that car is there. And I said, talk to your police officer at the school. Well, they did. And it turned out to be nothing, but they had a resource, and because they talked about who can we tell, and then one of them mentioned the officer at the school, and I said, talk to her, see what she'll guide you, no matter what, she'll take care of it. So the next day, they told her, and within that day, when they got home, that car was no longer there, and it was explained to them that it was like an abandoned car, and they finally found something. The car had broken down, whatever, but they were nervous, and it was great because this program is making them aware. An awareness of your surroundings. And just that in itself is great. And this was a nothing, which was a good thing. But it works. It really works so many ways.
Kathy, sensibly, in my view, raised the topic at the Tantascwa budget hearing of last week. And it occurred to me that the artistry in the non-answer, suggests that if you look at it from the tortoise and hare standpoint, slow and steady is going to win. You just, to change the metaphor, you got to understand it's not a movie that you're looking at each moment, you're looking at a snapshot. Well, that's freezing time, but life keeps changing. So I just came away glad that you asked the question, because that artistic non-answer seemed to say more than if you just went to the dictionary and read what the words meant. And so I think there is a basis, in my view, for hope.
I think, when presenting the attitude of the town of Sturbridge, the town of Sturbridge asks its police officers not only to protect its residents, but on a daily basis, many visitors to the town. And I think our police should especially be able to protect some of the most precious visitors to our town, the students from our neighboring 4 towns. And I think if we come along with that attitude, because our police officers don't just protect Sturbridge residents, anybody that comes to town, they are served and protected.
Okay, any other questions for the chief?
I just want to.
Joni?
Yeah, thanks, Mary. I haven't heard, nobody brought it up, but I just wanted to, I guess, thank you folks for putting together the contract, the employment contract for the police chief. Last year, we discussed it in depth. I know that Tom wanted it, and I think he's deserving of having a contract, and I hope that it's going to be ratified so that it's, amenable to everybody. And then, for those who didn't figure it out, that's obviously reflected in his salary line item. But again, I just want to make sure that that's noted, and I personally appreciate that being done, because that was the first thing I wanted to find out for the start of this year, is if that actually came to fruition.
It's coming.
Coming, almost there.
Will be done. Okay, anything else?
You can take your break.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Have
Thank
a
you.
good day.
Thank all of you for the questions, and I look forward to hopefully bringing those answers back to you that you've asked me for
Yes.
in April. Thanks.
Okay, we will take a small break for coffee, water,
One
bathrooms,
restroom over here and 2 over here.
and downstairs.
Are we done with him, right?
We have over.
Yes.
We got one restroom and storage closet over here.
Make sure you go on the right one. Talk to the guy.
Ready to go? Good morning, everyone. We have finally some sun and I think some warm weather coming, so I can't take credit for it, but I will appreciate it. I thought I would touch on a couple of the bigger items in my budget, and then if there are any questions specifically about any of the other items, we can go ahead and discuss those. A number of questions have come up about the SAFER grant, and I apologize for those who were not able to be part of the presentations that we did last spring before the grant was awarded, but let me touch on a couple of items. The federal grant that we received totals approximately $1.3 million. It's a 36-month program with a matching requirement. In year 1, the town has to match 25% of the funding. Year 2, the town has to match 25% of the funding. And in year 3, the town has to match 65% of the funding. At the end of the 36 months, the federal funding ends, and it will be up to the town to determine whether or not they want to continue funding those positions. That $1.3 million funds 4 firefighter positions, which means that 3 years from now, we'll have to have that conversation of whether or not, beginning January 1st, 2022, we will continue to support the funding for those positions. I am confident that the need will bear itself out. Our calls for service continue to increase annually. The nature of the calls that we go on are becoming more and more diverse. the requirement for safety and the requirement to provide adequate service pretty much requires us to continue to expand our manpower. What these 4 positions specifically will allow us to do is staff both of our ambulances the majority of the time. And I say the majority of the time because there are going to be times when people have vacation, there are going to be times when people have to call out sick, and sometimes we may not be able to staff both the ambulances all the time with these 4 positions. They will be filled somehow, but these 4 positions will allow us to staff 4 full-time personnel on duty the majority of the time. What that means is that we're not going to be calling in people and paying them overtime to staff that second ambulance. We're not going to be sending the call to a mutual aid town, which in our case, we don't receive any revenue for when that happens. So I'm very confident that 3 years from now, when we're having this discussion, there will be enough data and enough evidence to support keeping the funding for those 4 positions. The other question that came up about those 4 specifically positions was, what are the qualifications that those individuals need to have? Years ago, when the town decided that the fire department would become a paramedic service, there was a understanding that we would hire only paramedics. In my 20-something years of experience in EMS, my recommendation to the town administrator was that operationally is not as efficient as it may sound on its face. We do a finite number of calls each year. I have a finite number of paramedics. So those paramedics are divvying those calls up and keeping their skill set where it needs to be. The more that we dilute that percentage of calls that each one of them are doing, the less opportunity each one of them has to hone their skills. That doesn't mean that they're losing their skills. It just means that they're not getting that much hands-on practical application on a regular basis. However, I am an advocate for having paramedics on the fire department and continuing to employ paramedics. What we've done with this particular hiring is we've relaxed the paramedic standard at the application process so that we can hire basic EMTs. They will, as a condition of their employment, be required to obtain their paramedic certification within 2 years. So we will have the 4 SAFER grant positions that we're hiring will be paramedics within 2 years as a condition of their continued employment. The other thing I wanted to touch on, which was a kind of a hot topic, was the increase in the ambulance supplies budget.
Excuse me, Chief, I don't mean to cut you off, but I think it's important to explain the reason why that those restrictions on the paramedic were lessened. I think that part of what was important for everyone to also know, and this is information that the selectmen became aware of, is that we were having a difficult time. There's a lot of towns that are looking for paramedics, and we were having a challenging time finding fully qualified paramedics to fill the vacancies. The chief came forward with a good plan, which was to lessen the requirements at the front end, but to make sure that the obligation is there, that the individuals will continue their training to meet that requirement. So I think it's important that you folks know that was one of the critical reasons why this change was made.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chief.
Yeah, the initial job posting was sent out in July of last year. We received a very small pool of interested applicants. We resent out the job posting again in October, didn't have much more success. And in talking to my colleagues in the area and in and around the state, what I found out was there were a number of departments that were hiring. There were a number of departments that were also hiring for permanent positions, not just for these grant-funded positions. And the pool of paramedic applicants is a very, very small pool. And the trend or the common thought amongst my colleagues was we may be better off to find very good qualified EMT candidates and mold them into the paramedics that we want for our departments. So that was one of the big reasons why I had requested to relax those standards. And I'm happy to report that as of yesterday, I have made conditional offers to the 4 individuals. They've all accepted, and they're beginning their background process, their medical process, their physical agility process, and I hope to have them appointed sometime in April. So I'm looking forward to getting them on the roster and help them support us in the daily things that we do. I mentioned the ambulance supplies, the question of the significant increase of the ambulance supplies. This is something that unfortunately is the nature of our business. We are going on more calls each year. Generally, we're increasing about 5% a year, the number of calls that we do, emergency medical services calls. And the nature of those calls are becoming more and more emergent, requiring us to use more equipment, more supplies. In addition to that, the cost of those supplies is unregulated and increases drastically at the drop of a hat. Some of the medications that we're using are increasing 100, 150% in their costs. I'll give you just a quick example. Narcan, the so-called wonder drug that everyone is now aware of because of this opiate epidemic. A few years ago, we were paying $6.32 for a vial of Narcan. That's one dose. Almost overnight, that cost went to $42 for that same exact dose. The little, what we call, it's called an atomizer. It makes the liquid a mist that we use to deliver it, was 65 cents. The next day, it was $6.50. And there's no way to predict how that's going to happen or when. We can budget for what we know, but some of those unknowns are just impossible to foresee. This increase represents what I do know. The cost of the medications and the supplies that we are buying currently to treat our citizens has gone up astronomically. So I realize there's a big number there. It represents probably about a 25% increase, but that's really the cost of us doing our business today. So those are really the 2 big things on the fire side that I wanted to touch on. And I'm happy to answer questions about any other part of the fire budget before we get to the public safety side.
Chief, on the ambulance supplies, the increase in costs, some of them related to Hurricane Puerto Rico?
No, I don't believe so. It's difficult to say, but I don't believe so. These pharmaceutical manufacturers just have, unlimited power to charge what they want. And a lot of times what'll happen, what we find, and this is probably more of an opinion than a fact, we will find ourselves in a nationwide shortage of a particular medication, for example. Sometimes it's not the medication that's driving the cost, it's the company who's producing the distribution device for that medication, the plastic syringe. And they are what's driving the cost up because they're limiting their supply to the manufacturers of the medication. That's costing the manufacturers to have to raise their costs. So I don't think there's one particular thing that's causing it, but I do know that it's happening on an unfortunate regular basis.
Mike?
Chief, could you please comment on the revenue side as far as increases in ambulance fees and so forth, so that the Finance Committee can know that we're covering our costs?
Sure. One of the things we did in the fall, myself and the finance director sat down and looked at our ambulance rates, and we found that we were significantly at the lower end of the scale in comparison to 11 or 12 of the area towns around us. We put forth a proposal to raise the rates to the Board of Selectmen. That proposal was accepted and approved, and in January, our new rates went into effect. We are seeing a significant increase in billables in the month of January and the month of February. Some of that's attributed to the increase in the rates. Some of it's attributed to the increase in the number of calls that were going on. But we have seen an increase in the amount of the billables. I would just be cautious to say that just because our billables have increased does not necessarily translate to mean that our revenues are going to increase, but certainly there's a percentage of those billables that will help our revenues to increase.
No questions from FinCom? Mike?
Are we tracking the opioid calls? You know, how are those?
We are. We're averaging about between the fire department and the police department, 1.5 per month over the last 12 months. We have done, the fire department has done about 1 a month, and the police department did 6 in the last 12 months.
Now, how does that compare on a per capita basis, you know, for a town of this size? That
We have not been taken hold by the opioid crisis yet.
Yeah.
It's coming, but we're not there yet. The area towns, some of the area towns have it much worse than us. And that's a very, very fortunate fact considering our transient population, considering where we sit between 84 and 90, considering the fact that we have such a large amount of hotel rooms in this town. We should consider ourselves very fortunate that we're only at that 1.5 a month.
And we host a regional school district.
Yeah. On the safety complex side, we pretty much tried to stay fairly level funded. There is, I think, one item that's more of a hot topic than some of the others, the washer and dryer installation that I asked for. This is something that when I came to the fire department, took me by surprise that there was no residential style washer and dryer in the fire department. We do have what we call a gear extractor. Basically, it's a commercial front-load wash machine like you would see at a laundromat. That's used when we go out to, for example, a fire or a fuel spill. We throw our turnout gear, the firefighting gear that we wear, into that to get those chemicals, the soot, the carbon, the carcinogens off of that equipment. Certainly, none of us want to wash our uniform clothing in that particular dryer. But at the same time, the firefighters do not have a facility to wash their uniforms. So if we do go on a call, for example, we had one last week, it was a car accident. The crew was helping to secure the patient to the stretcher. He was bloody and reached up as a way to say thank you, but got blood all over one of the firefighters' uniforms. The policy is that they have a second uniform. Fortunately, we did, but now that individual is faced with, I have to bring this home and wash it in the clothes dryer or the clothes washer that my child's clothes are washed in or my significant other's clothes are washed in. It to me, doesn't seem logical to ask them to do that. So I think the question with the request is not so much for the washer and dryer as much as the cost of the installation. And the cost of the installation is really driven by the fact that the main level of the public safety complex, which is the ideal place for this washer and dryer, doesn't have the current setup that we need. So we need to core through the concrete, we need to run the plumbing lines, we need to run the electricity into a janitor's closet to do this. And that's why that number is what it is. Keep in mind, it's a budgetary number, and I would be hopeful to reduce it when the actual time came, but those were the budgetary numbers that we were provided with.
Anyone else? Joni?
So we had talked already, so we went over a lot of this, but one thing that I noticed, John, was that, we talked about the oil increase and how it's significant, and maybe Barbara, you can answer, I don't know, but I went through a significant increase to the public safety, but I don't see that increase in oil in any of the other buildings. So I know that just by the nature of, doors opening and closing and all that, and I didn't know how much that was a factor in why the increase, or is it because the safety complex is just insufficient in, the insulation? I don't know. It just strikes me as a high increase. If it's valid, but I don't see that in any other building, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so the safety complex, the oil bid is based with the school department because they have large oil tanks in their building. So they have already gone out to bid for fiscal 19, and so the proposed budget is based on the same number of gallons that they use every year, but it's a higher rate for fiscal 19 than 18.
So the public safety and the high school?
It's a
together?
school collaborative, and so it's other schools. It's French River Collaborative, I believe is what it's called, and they go out to bid, and historically, the public safety complex has been attached to that bid because of the large volume. Now, some years, like I can tell you for fiscal 18, the public safety complex actually has a higher bid than the town does. That's the way it worked out, but there's many years where that bid process results in the public safety complex having a lower bid price for oil than the other town buildings.
So the remaining town buildings, are they grouped together?
So for oil, we bid through the Central Mass Regional Planning Commission. They do a collaborative bid, and we usually participate in that bid.
Is there any, outside of the volume of the oil, is there any other reason why the public safety should be included in the school collaborative? Do we care?
No, I mean,
I think what she's saying is that 9 times out of 10, it's going to be beneficial rate because they're benefiting from the larger
volume.
And they're certainly a high user.
Yeah, right, okay.
Most of the time, it's going to work.
Yeah, from my experience on bidding oil, usually you get anywhere from 10 to 20 cents a gallon less if you have a large storage tank as opposed to the smaller deliveries for the other town buildings. But apparently it didn't work out that way this time for the schools. And that can all...
It's all factored by when you go out to bid also. So,
Yeah.
they've locked into a rate for fiscal 19. We have not locked into a rate yet for the town buildings because that usually happens closer to the beginning of the fiscal year. Timing is everything. I mean, I can get oil delivered today and you get it tomorrow and, the price differential could be 10 cents, 20, depends what the market's, what the market price is on the day. So that is what we've been doing, but we did participate for the public safety complex. We are locked into an oil rate for fiscal 19, and it is reflective in his budget.
Anyone else?
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Thank you.
Okay, who's up next?
That's right.
We have the pleasure of introducing a new department head for the town of Sturbridge this year. The Board of Health has recently hired Bree Einstadt?
Pretty close, Eichstätt, yeah.
Einstead, as the new health agent for the town of Sturbridge, and we're very happy to have her. She comes from working in Southampton as a health agent and in Greenfield, and she recently started, maybe a month and a half ago?
Yep.
About a month and a half ago for the town of Sturbridge. And not that there is a tremendous amount of changes in the budget for the Board of Health, but there were some, and I just wanted to have an opportunity for the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee to meet Bree and to ask any questions, or maybe you can start by just explaining a little bit about the operating budget at the Board of Health side.
So my name is Bree. And like Leon said, I come from Southampton as their health agent, and then I moved to Greenfield because it was a lot larger of a city, and they had a lot more opportunities for learning and training and stuff like that. So Southampton didn't have a lot of housing, pools, or camps or anything like that, so going to Greenfield is where I got all my certifications and learned, and then I was looking to obviously further my career and also find a job a little bit closer to home, so this is closer for me. As far as the budget goes, the landfill and recycling center, I think, is the same. There's really no changes there. As for the Board of Health, I think the only changes are legal ads increased, and that's because we're looking to upgrade our regulations. I want to look into upgrading the well regulations and tobacco regulations, as well as doing a fee schedule review and see if we can increase some fees where it's needed, or and those all require us advertising in the papers. So, and training went up because we have a full-time inspector and myself now, and the trainings that we go to, there's a lot of training opportunities throughout the year, so that increased slightly, as well as our dues, because we looked through all of the dues that we're part of, and we were off a little bit on those, and so those are the 3 increases really, but they're pretty minor.
Mike?
So the last couple of years, we had some discussions on how we're staffing the Board of Health in terms of full-time, part-time, agent versus inspectors. Can you, with your coming on board and changes, can you kind of run through what we have for staffing now in terms of by position and whether they're full-time or part-time staff?
Yep, so I'm full-time health agent, and we have a full-time health inspector. She does all of the inspections. We never fall behind on inspections, where in my previous town, we were almost behind all the time. So I think we're properly staffed for the inspector job, and she's able to respond to complaints. We got a complaint the other day, and she was able to respond first thing that morning, so. And then we have a part-time admin assistant who's 25 hours a week. And I'm 35, and Jamie Grace is 35 as well.
So among those 3 individuals, that's where all the inspections are taking place. We're not using additional staff to supplement any of those inspections?
So right now, there's money left over, and Barbara, correct me if I'm wrong, in my line item, because what they had budgeted for the health agent position is not what I started at. So right now, we are using Jamie Terry, the previous health agent, we're paying her hourly to do Title V. I'm certified in Title V, however, the Board of Health chair, and she can comment more on this in April, is looking to keep Jamie Terry on as our part-time Title V inspector to do all perk test, plan reviews, inspections.
Going into next fiscal year as well?
Yes.
So, we talked about a full-time agent, a full-time inspector, part-time admin. There's also going to be a part-time Title V inspector in addition to that?
Yeah, so we're kind of fine-tuning that right now, Barbara and I, and also Linda, the Board of Health chair. She would no longer be paid hourly come the new fiscal year, because we just budgeted for my salary. We don't have that money kind of left over in that line item. So she would be paid a percentage of the fees. So we're looking to increase some of our septic fees, and Jamie would be paid a percentage of that fee instead of an hourly rate. And we are looking to set up a revolving fund for that.
Why do we need to have the additional person to do the Title V?
So I think in the past, and, since I've only been here for a month and a half, but this is, based on what Jamie Terry and Linda have, seen. Jamie Terry was part-time, she was interim, she didn't want to be full-time. The Board of Health was really able to scrape by, I think, in Jamie's position to keep up with, requests from planning board for comments and stuff, but I don't think this position was ever really going to meetings, going to trainings, staying up with current topics. We have a very, large topic coming up, which is marijuana, and I want to be very involved with that with, a lot of towns are looking to have, smoking cafes, and that totally falls under Board of Health with smoking regulations and nuisances and odors, and public health. So I don't think the position before was able to do those type of things. And then with Title V on top of that, we have a lot of Title V going on in town. And a lot of the systems I'm finding, just from seeing them kind of come into the office, are innovative and alternative systems, which take longer to review. And I think that it would be very hard for my position to do that, because sometimes that can take almost 50% of your time up. And I think, based on what I've heard from, the Board of Health chair, previous health agents really enjoyed Title V, so they kind of focused all their time on that, and a lot of things weren't being looked at. I don't think our tobacco regs have been updated. The state, and this is a really, future conversation, but the state is looking to, I would say tobacco is going to be tobacco 21 within the next 5 years. And I don't want to be that town that's behind the curve and kind of outdated. I think we need to look at our tobacco regs a lot, and I don't think that that is something that is able to be done with, the weight of Title V as well.
So for budgetary reasons, it really isn't going to impact our budget, because she's going to receive her income from a percentage of the fees?
Yep.
How does that impact the revenue?
So we were looking, I don't know exactly if we've come down and come with a concrete percentage yet, but a percentage will still be coming to the town for like an administration fee for having to, create the permits and all that. But it would be coming out of a separate revolving fund.
I think there's a lot of questions that we've had about this issue. I think Barbara and I have had a number of conversations with Bree, but mostly the chair of the Board of Health on these issues. I think that when you have your meeting with the Board of Health, I think it's going to be, I think a lot of these questions are going to be very important to kind of feather through.
Okay.
I would say, in some respects, I agree with Bree in some respects, in that our Board of Health has for probably a number of years been a reactive board. Somebody applies for something, the Board of Health does the response to what that application requires. On the more proactive things, we and probably a lot of other towns kind of fall behind in doing some of the proactive public health kind of things that are statutorily given to boards of health in Massachusetts. And I think that in some ways, I kind of understand what the Board of Health is attempting to do here. They are trying to increase their capacity and their service levels in the town without it trying to adversely affect the town's revenues and operating budget. However, I still think that we're still, we've been in a little bit of a, I didn't want to use the word chaos, but we've been in kind of a transitional period in the short time that I've been here in the Board of Health, having transitioned from a department head who had been here for a number of years to, the Board of Health really struggling to figure out what it is that they wanted to do and how they wanted to staff those positions. I think that the Board of Health, is looking at a more proactive way of handling things, and this is their solution to be able to do that. And that's why you'll notice that the operating budget is shorter, is smaller on the salary side than it was the years before, well, at least this current fiscal year. But there are those questions that you and Mike have raised are both very valid, and I think that the chair of the Board of Health will probably be in a position to answer some of those based on her review of the last year, even maybe better than what Bree can, having been only here for 6 weeks, so.
Okay, Leon, on that, when the chair of the Board of Health, if she writes up anything, could we please get a copy too? Because the communication sometimes is lacking. As a matter of fact, I didn't even know you were on board. We received no notification. I read your name someplace, and I said, who's that? So.
Yeah, and I want to work on that as well. I think having this position staffed full-time and me being, in the office with set hours rather than kind of like walk in, and I also, I want it to be more, so the public can come and actually have someone to talk to and not be like, oh, well, you know, we'll text her and she'll come in, you know what I mean? I think, and I want to get, you know, our applications updated and professional looking and put on that website so we can say, you know, temporary food vendors that are coming in on the weekend, like, just go on our website and grab it rather than, so, you know, it's kind of old school having them come in and fill it out. So I'm trying to get us more,
Modern.
yeah, and I want there to be more communication between my
Yeah,
office
because
and
it's
everyone
nice
else.
to know, I mean, we realize the fact that you're an independent elected
Yeah.
committee, but
But I
we
have
like
to
to know
work
what's
with,
going on.
I have to work with town hall, you know, every day, so I want to be, you know, have good relationships with everybody as well, and be more, have a better line of communication for sure.
Mike?
I just have a question or a suggestion maybe that, you know, that there's no purchase of services for, line item for a, within the Board of Health. This temporary inspector for Title V, if there was a line item for that rather than having a revolving fund, they could also use it, say if there was a large event that had a lot of temporary vendors and they needed somebody to fill in real quickly, that, you know, it might be more flexible for the Board of Health to have a line item for a temporary inspector like that. I mean, you know, sometimes somebody might come in with a whole bunch of perk tests or something that have to be done. Then you could hire somebody to go out and do it, as opposed to if somebody came in with one perk test, maybe staff might be able to handle that.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, also, I have to agree, it gives us a little more certainty on what that line item is going to be going out every year, and it's not contingent based on Title V reports and a percentage of that, you know.
If I may, Madam Chair.
Yes, please.
One additional question, try to connect a couple dots. Is it anticipated that in fiscal 19 that there would be more Title V inspections if the personnel was arranged in the way that we described?
It's a question for Bree.
You can't really, I looked at previous numbers. Another thing we're working on is just making sure we're tracking everything we do, so if when things like this come up, we'll have, you know, legitimate numbers. I was able to estimate what we did last year, and it was about 35 permits. But that we could have done 50 perks, because every time you do a perk, that doesn't always mean it comes with a permit after. Because somebody could, you know, not buy the land or abandon it, but.
Or it fails.
Or it fails, yeah. But it's hard to anticipate what we're gonna have each year. It depends. I know there's a development that was under discussion at a land use meeting. And with that, if it's not gonna be on town sewer, like you said, there could be, you know, 40 perks that need to be done. I do have the certifications required to do perk tests and plan reviews, so I think if there's ever any, you know, need for assistance, that I would be there, but the point is it for it not to be, you know, a priority of this position.
So Bruce, I would suggest that when the planner and the building inspector come to our meeting, they may have some insight as to projects that are in the development queue that may come forward over the next year, and which ones may require Title V inspections. That may give you some more direction to your question.
And like you brought up the point, and again, for having a separate line item for services, purchase of services, is that you mentioned an innovative design. In that instance, you would probably want to have somebody outside look at it that's, you know.
Well, it doesn't require anybody to look at innovative alternative, but we do have something in our fee schedule in case it is a very large system. I think DEP upped it, so they used to review systems over 2,000 gallons per day, but now they only review ones that are 10,000 plus. So when we have things that are like 8,000 gallons per day, say a supermarket, that might be a little bit outside of what a normal health agent or Title V inspector could do. We do have something in our fee schedule if we need a third-party review, and that's expensive, so we do have that in there. And that would be paid for by the person submitting their plan.
Anything else, Mike?
So right now, is the Title V work paid for out of this department head salary budget, or?
I think so, yeah, because there's a little bit of,
The
there's,
rest of the
yeah.
fiscal year, okay. But
Yeah.
that'll move to like an inspection and testing type budget,
It should be.
Should be the money.
like we do for the plumbing or the electrical.
I think
You know,
it's
where
in
it's
the
paid,
salary wages,
it's a fixed amount of money and they get
unless the department
percentage of the fee.
I'm not understanding, what was your, I'm not understanding your question.
If we move right now Jamie's paired up the department head budget for the Title V work for the rest of the fiscal year. And then she's gonna be paid out of a separate line item that will be like should be like a plumbing inspector or electrical inspector, where they get a percentage of the fee, or they get so much per inspection, is that? So it'll be moved out of this department budget.
I don't think it is moved out of this.
So when the position was advertised for Bree's position, it was advertised to become a registered sanitarian within 1 year.
Yeah.
And so the agreement was that Jamie Terry would continue potentially through this fiscal year, because someone's coming on board at the very end of the fiscal year, and that we would be able to pay that person in the interim from the department head budget, because we had been paying a lot less, and it is a role of the health agent per the current job description. So it's just being done by 2 people. The discussion that is still ongoing is as to whether or not, how that will be, what will happen in fiscal 19.
Right.
So the current discussion on the table was adding to our revolving accounts at the annual town meeting, or actually, I think at the special town meeting, so that it would be in effect for the annual town meeting. And if that's the case, if that's the route that we go, there doesn't need to be an appropriation, because it'll be the fees that go in. And what was proposed at the last meeting that we had was that this role would get 90% of the fee collected, and the town would get the other 10%.
Okay, now,
Okay.
there already is a revolving fund for the Board of Health.
We
modify
would have to modify it, but I'm kind of the opinion, if we're going to have this new position created, that it should be a revolving fund of its own, just separate for that, to deal with that. So Bree has drafted language for a revolving fund that I still have to review, and Leon still needs to review, so we're not at that point yet. But I did not budget in the operating budget for that position that she's speaking about.
Well, but the structure you're discussing in there is similar to how we pay our plumbing inspector and our electrical inspector. They get a
They don't get a fee, they don't get a percentage, they get a flat dollar amount. So right now, they're getting 40.
They get a payment for conducting an inspection, whether it's a percentage or a flat fee. There's a payment for conducting an inspection and performing the work. And those salaries are included in line items in those department budgets. Now this one seems to be going through a revolving fund versus a line item here in the department. And I guess
right.
when you flush this out, I'd like to, if you do go that way, why we're treating this one different than we are, in my mind, similar positions.
I think it has to do with the fact that we're not paying the other inspectors on a percentage basis. We have a flat fee established for that. When you start working on a percentage basis, we felt that the revolving fund was the more appropriate vehicle by which they could be. I mean, look, I guess we're open to having a further discussion about it, but that was the.
What is the average fee
I was
for
going to ask that.
inspection in this regard?
Right now, it's, I think, $250 for a plan review and a permit, but a lot of towns have a plan review fee and then a permit fee, because sometimes we review fees, or we'll review a plan, and then the person disappears, so it's like we reviewed this kind of, for nothing, and then if lots of years goes by, like we actually have a plan right now where 9 years have gone by, and we're not gonna just issue a permit, we need it to be, reevaluated and stuff. So we're looking to have a plan review fee to kind of protect us from that happening, and then a permit fee. And we don't have those numbers that's gonna be for our fee schedule review that I wanna have done by July 1. But right now, it's $250 for that, and a perk test, I believe, is $125. So, that's what those are our main fees, and then we have a lot of different ones. I don't know off the top of my head that we don't use often, like I said, the third-party review fee or something like that.
And to be clear, we're talking about someone getting paid for witnessing and conducting on behalf of the town a Title V perk test. I could come in and ask for the perk test without asking you to do a plan review, and that would just be the $125
Yep.
fee. Okay.
I have one more question about, do we used to have a bar inspector or like a swimming pool inspector or, budget for that? Where does that?
That's all under the health inspector now.
Do they do the barn inspection?
Barn inspections are under the animal
Animal
inspector.
control officer.
Animal control officer?
We do everything else, though, pools, camps, food, housing.
All right, thank you.
Is there an option on the table that as we pay our inspectors, this person could be paid that way versus percentage?
A flat fee?
A flat fee, like say it's $250, so the inspector gets blank, a fee versus a percentage. Like we do with the plumbing inspector, the electrical inspector, whatever.
So, yeah, I think this is a discussion that I think has to happen with the Board of Health, because there's a lot involved in this, for sure.
Thanks.
Okay, anything else?
Yeah.
Bruce?
Another question along those lines. But there certainly are going to be some inspections for which the person is not compensated, right? Maybe a re-inspection, or having to go back more than once or twice? Or they disappear.
Yeah, there's going to be times when the health inspector will probably, or in this case, the septic inspector would end up losing money, yeah. If they had to go back 2 or 3 times and they only got one flat fee, you get a flat fee of 1, I mean, you get a percentage of the fee on one, but you get if you have to go back 2 or 3 times on a re-inspection or whatever, you might end up losing money. Yeah, that's probably the case.
And, I mean, that would be an argument for the flat fee as opposed to the only when a permit is issued.
Well, just so you all know, it's the Board of Health that's requesting the fee-based payment. That's their recommendation with a revolving fund.
It's a totally separate question. Is that I see the difference is about $16,000 in the department head compensation. Is that going to last you to the end of fiscal year to 2018?
The difference in the department head salary.
How much did you have available to pay her for this year? Is it used up, or is it going to be used up by the end of this fiscal year?
The inspector you're talking about?
Yes, yeah.
There's enough money to pay to get us through June 30th.
Are you asking us if we're going to be returning money from the Board of Health salary line for this fiscal year? Is that what you're asking?
Indirectly.
Yes.
Indirectly, yes.
Oh, I think the answer is yes, yes.
Oh, good.
I mean, you have to remember, we budgeted for a full-time health agent, and we only had someone working less than, even sometimes less than part-time, less than 20 hours a week on some weeks, so.
We're going to be returning, I would imagine, I don't have that
I don't know.
number in front of us, but
Yeah.
we're imagining we're returning a significant portion of that fund.
Yeah, thank you.
Free cash next year.
That's exactly what I was getting at.
Karen?
Okay.
So just when we convene again on this topic, one of the things that I would want to know is how the 90 versus 10% that we're proposing to pay this agent, what the justification is for those numbers.
Okay.
And why a percentage versus the fee. I think that would be important. And then why not the line item versus the revolving funds? Those would be the questions that I would be looking to have an answer to.
Okay.
Okay, Mike?
Yeah, the town administrator was talking about re-inspection, and that would occur during construction of a septic system, and I'm sure that the Board of Health fees would have an initial inspection fee, plus if the inspector had to go back and re-inspect, the inspector would get more. The argument for a line item and against a percentage fee would be the situation that was mentioned where there's a request for 40 perk tests or something like that. An inspector could go and do that easily within a week, get 40 perk tests, and that would be like, you know, like $5,000 in fees, and if the inspector got 90% of that for 1 week's work, that's, I don't know if that's fair or equitable to anybody. So I think a line item where the inspector would get paid by the hour might be more equitable to the town, or.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, thank you, Bree. And
Oh, no,
I think,
Oh, sorry, Johnny.
That's okay. This, my question's, it's not unrelated to what we were just talking about on the inspection fees, but it's also just an observation, and I want clarity on some of the things that you had mentioned. When we were talking about the inspector, the Title V inspector, you had gone on to say, you know, when Mike asked, you know, what this person would be doing and all that, what exactly would this person be doing? Because you did mention, you know, marijuana and tobacco and all that. I mean, is this person going to be somehow involved in, I'm confused as to why that was brought up in the discussion with, huh?
So,
She does.
Okay, so I wanted clarity on that. The other thing was, you said an increase in legal fees is being reviewed, and maybe this is something that the Board of Health can discuss when they come before the Finance Committee. But I'm concerned that, you know, I'm always concerned when we raise fees. I'm going to be perfectly honest. We have tons of them, and they're confusing to everybody, businesses and residents, and they go up and up and up. So I am a little bit interested to hear about that, but I'm also concerned, you know, is the fact that we're bringing this new role in, because it sounds like it's a new role to the town, a new personnel review, I would imagine, has to go involved with this Title V inspector. Is that the reason for the review of fee increases?
I think, no, I think the fee schedule hasn't been increased in several years, so I don't think that that's the main reason, no. And the legal fees has to do with the ads that we're going to have to put into the newspapers for not only the fee schedule, but.
Sorry, I'm being specific on not the amount of the legal fees that's in the budget. You had mentioned increases that need to be reviewed by legal, such as septic increases. What other permits are you looking to increase?
No, not legal, we don't need legal review of the increase of our fees. I meant putting ads in the newspaper, but those can just be set by the Board of Health and tobacco regulations as well. Those don't need to be reviewed by legal, if I'm understanding correctly your question.
I think that what's in the budget is for legal ads. That's the advertisement cost to print the classified ads in the
Okay,
newspaper.
I misheard, I thought.
Because they're public hearings and they have to be advertised to the public.
But townwide, I can tell you that one of the things that the town has been looking at seriously is our fee structure. And when, you know, I know that the Board of Selectmen, just at our last meeting, had a conversation with our building inspector about fees in our town. This past year, you just heard from Chief Grasso before he left about our ambulance fees. A lot of our fees have not been looked at or touched in several years. And when you look at our benchmark communities, we find that we are not competitive with our benchmark communities when it comes to what we are charging for the same service in a neighboring town is far greater. Ambulance was a great example. Board of Health fees were another area. I did ask Bree and the Board of Health to look at their fees, because, you know, one of the things that we talk about is, you know, revenues, and you know, we keep adding and adding services and adding expenses every year, but we don't look at adding to the revenues. The Finance Committee and I talked last year about doing a comprehensive study of our local receipts, our local fee structure, to make sure that we are recouping at least as much as we possibly can of the costs to do business. It's not necessarily fair that just the entire taxpayers pay the burden, that the people who are getting the inspections should be bearing a more than appropriate amount for those inspections to be done, those services to be provided.
So nobody's denying that the people should be paying for that service. My issue is that if you were to look at some of the other communities, now whether it's the 10 towns or the surrounding communities, I've looked at both. There are inconsistencies in some of the fees, not all of them, just a handful that I might have checked out recently. My only point is, and I hope that it would be part of the discussion and review process, is that, you know, we have a large tax in Sturbridge. And so the people who are paying these fees are the same people who are paying the property taxes.
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes.
In most cases, you know, talking residents and businesses alike.
Yeah, if you're a resident who owns a
I would just like that
business
to be
in town.
looked at, because when you start adding up the amount of fees that someone has to pay, whether it's for an inspection or a permit or a license, in some cases 3 for one, it adds up, and it's in addition to their taxes, essentially,
Yeah,
just
fair-
like a dog license.
Yep, fair enough,
Okay.
fair enough.
3 signs on there. Yeah. Of course, Joni, your big taxes in Sturbridge. We have an average tax in Sturbridge. If you look at the 351 communities, for the past 20, 25 years, we've been consistently in the middle. Yes, our taxes go up, but so doesn't everybody else. And when you look at the services that Sturbridge provides in our buildings and everything, I mean, it's not really a big tax. Nobody likes taxes.
Nobody
I
likes
just
taxes,
moaned-
and it
I
might
just
not-
moaned yesterday because
That's
tax
okay.
bills
I mean,
came.
I moan every time I see it come into the house, personally. But you have to also look and see what those other communities are getting for their taxes. That's all.
Well, no, you do, but, and there's a whole spreadsheet online you can go to, and we have darn good services here.
No doubt, but some of those other higher tax towns have more. You know, I mean, let's trash pickup. Okay, stuff like that I'm talking about, right? We don't have that.
No, but if we did, we'd pay for
And
it.
I'm not, you know, this is, we could talk
Oh, yeah.
offline
No,
all you
no,
want
it's-
with it,
it's
right?
always,
It's
everybody
a bone of
complains.
contention with me.
There's not a town around that some citizens don't say, the taxes are too high. When are they ever going to go down? They're never going to go down. But,
Right, but when
We
when
stay-
you add up all these other
yeah.
fees and permits, though, Mary, you know, and especially to the business communities in particular, or even someone who has Title V, I'm fortunate I don't have Title V. However, I am on sewer, so I do get a sewer and water tax, which to me is a tax, which is an increase to my taxes to the town. It adds up, you know.
of course
when
it
you look
does,
at it.
no doubt about it. But the point was that Sturbridge is consistent. We don't make, you know, we don't move from 175 up to 2 or 3 on the tax bill, not tax rate, just tax bill. So, but that's
Not to
every
belabor
town.
the subject, I just don't think we can look at it in a bubble.
No.
You know, I mean, our tax rates reflect what we provide to the community.
Right.
There are fees on top of that for the services that are in addition to what we're already providing to the community. And I think what would be fair is that we're competitive
Yeah.
with other towns on what the average rate is for those, because we can't compare our services to a town that collects less taxes. Our schools are better, our police department, I just
Fire
don't think it's
department.
that simple of a topic.
No, it's not. But that's, you know, we are looking at the fees. As Leon said, we had the building inspector in, looking at those fees. I mean, there's fees for everything, you know, and they always go up. Even things that aren't town provided. Look at your phone bill,
And even,
famous cable bill.
but even if you didn't have water and sewer, let's just say, for example, you needed to have your own septic system, let's just say for argument's sake, there's a fee to that, that's not free. I mean, how much is it for a septic system, 10 grand?
It can be anywhere from 10 to 30 grand.
Plus
10
you
to
have to
30.
pump it
I would say
every
higher
couple of
than-
years, and
Right, so I mean, you know, everything has to be kind of
There's a
taken,
cost.
you know, comparatively. I think the best
Title
way of...
V, Title V.
I'm sorry,
said-
Mr.
no, Sorry,
Supernet.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to answer a question from, that, about pumping your septic system. Actually, Title V says that your septic system has to be pumped annually.
So you said every couple of years. That's a.
Well, that's what
That's if you
people
want
do.
the Title V to be valid
It's
for
an
a
expression.
sale,
Yeah.
but.
Yeah,
I
but
would
there's
say-
a cost.
I would say if you really want to see how the town of Sturbridge does for its taxes from one year to the next, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has done a really good job of preparing through its Division of Local Services on the DOR's website some very powerful spreadsheets. And one of the ones that you want to look at is the average annual tax bill. The chairman of the board said it correctly. You really want to look and see how you compare on an annual basis. And if you find that you were, 102nd one year, and then you've moved up in the state to 34, yeah, there's a real clear indication that there's something going wrong in the town of Sturbridge. But if you notice that in comparison with all the other communities in the Commonwealth, we tend to be in the same place year after year after year, you'll find that, that's basically you are covering the police, fire, schools, DPW, and all the other general government in the level of services that the people of the town have come to expect. Here today, we've had conversations about safer grants, more police officers and dispatchers, so on and so forth. All of those things come with a cost, and you're not going to be cutting presumably not cutting the operating budget to cover the cost of any or all of those things in the future years. We've got to be looking at, you got to pay the bill, and to pay your bill, you got to have the revenues. The revenues come from property taxes. I said at the very beginning, 74% of our revenues come from property taxes. 14% come from state aid. The remaining comes from local receipts. We're trying our best to do what we can so that the people who are using the services are the ones who are paying for, the money at the end of the day. And I know that some people are going to say that may not be fair. We don't charge a police officer, we don't charge the person, if the police have to go to their house, we don't charge them more in their taxes than for a police officer, or for a resident that doesn't have a police go to their house. The same way we don't charge a senior less in property taxes because they don't have any kids in the school district. So it is a big issue that we have to face. When Mr. Hagar started at the very beginning talking about, what are the things that we have to be worried about moving forward. My worry is that the reliance on the property tax is not going to be sufficient moving forward, and that we're either going to have to look at an override, or we're going to have to look at a massive reduction in services, or we have to figure out ways of controlling where the real cost explosions are coming. And all of those are very, very difficult decisions. Excuse me. All of those are very difficult decisions that need to involve the entire community, and that's why your jobs are so very difficult, and that's why your jobs are also very difficult. That's why our jobs are so difficult. We try to balance all of those things together.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Okay, thank you, Bree, and
Thanks.
welcome to town.
Thank you. It's nice to meet everyone officially. Thanks.
In the last few minutes that we have left with each other before we adjourn, I'm willing to answer any questions, hypothetical, theoretical, practical.
Impractical.
I know that I said at the very beginning, this is the beginning of a long marathon. The Finance Committee has a large job ahead of them. You folks are going to be meeting twice a week for the next several weeks moving forward. The Board of Selectmen, has a difficult job preparing the warrant and reviewing the warrant and preparing their recommendations on those items as well. I have sent out to both bodies a preliminary list of the articles that we have that we're aware of. That will be further refined in the next few weeks. Does anyone have any questions that I can answer at this point?
Mike?
So along those lines, when you gave, the listing kind of gave the title of what the article was going to be. When will we be able to see the details of the warrant articles, and more importantly, the dollar amounts associated with each one of those for
Well, I
our
can give you the
discussions?
dollar amounts of those associated now. I'm sorry that I didn't do that earlier. I apologize. I think there were only a handful of articles that were money articles. But yeah, I can get that to you. When's your meeting is on Tuesday?
Yes. Well, every Tuesday, Thursday.
'Tis the
No,
season.
you're not talking about the details of the water and sewer budget. You're talking about all the money articles for, like, there were a handful of articles that were purchases out of free cash as articles. I don't know that I can I'm not gonna be able to give you the complete water budget, the complete sewer budget. Those aren't gonna be done this week. But I can give you the articles for the money bar articles that are individual purchases, and I think there were only like 2 or 3 of those in this warrant.
Well,
Yeah, I mean, the total warrant's not going to be done till,
It's gonna be a few more weeks before
Yeah.
all of that's done.
and
I will have, according to my schedule with you folks, I will have the warrants done, I believe, by April 28th, I want to say is the date. But I'll get it to you, I'll get you pieces even earlier if you folks want it, what do you want? Just let me know what you want.
Okay.
I mean, the earlier they get even partial, they can look at it.
Well, I mean, we don't generally get to the warrants until
May.
almost, well, no, before that, mid-April. But I mean, it's good to know them.
By the time you get through the departmental schedule that just went out yesterday,
Mhm.
you will have,
The warrant articles.
you should
Yeah.
have you should have numbers by then.
Yeah.
I've already started a draft warrant already.
Yeah.
So.
At the last Board of Selectmen's meeting, the Board of Selectmen asked for another article to be added to the warrant as well. So as the town administrator updates, the Finance Committee will certainly be included.
Yeah, the warrant doesn't close until April 28th, I
Right.
think was the date that we said, or on or about that day.
Okay, anything else? Oh, thank you all for coming.
Coming, and giving up your Saturday for this.
It's just Saturday morning. And it's earlier than some
It's
years.
usual. Yeah, it's usual.
We finished earlier?
Oh, gosh, one year we went
my
till
God, 2
almost,
o'clock?
Oh, before you all leave, I do want you to know one last thing, and I won't be more than a second. I am going to be sending out for the first time kind of a feedback form to the members of the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen to see kind of how you like the format of this, just to kind of get feedback on how these Saturday meetings are structured and established. You know, do we still want to do them? Do you still think they're helpful? Those types of things. So you'll be getting that from me shortly, and I'd love to get any feedback, everything from the types of refreshments that we give to the time it starts. You know, I'll be looking for your feedback on those, so thank you.
It's one of the better years.
Kathy can put down her fruit.
Huh, fruit? I say that every year.
That's a